Uh, there we go. All right, we will call the meeting of the Charter Revision Commission, January 21st, 2025 meeting to order at 6:33. And then do our roll call. We have Tyler Fairbairn, Carl Dickens, Rick McQuaid, John Levin, Tanya Rhodes Small, Doug Hempstead, Jim Clark, Joe Bennett. We are just missing Ed Camacho, but hopefully Ed will be able to join us sooner rather than later. We have the next item before we get into our new business is public participation. So let me take a quick look here and see if we have anybody here in our attendees. We have two. One with her hand raised, Lisa Britton. We'd love to hear from Lisa. Lisa, oh hi Ed, welcome.
Hi there.
Lisa, you are on the clock for public participation.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Excellent. Lisa Britton, 19 Shorefront Park, Independent Party Town Chair. I just wanted to thank Mr. Benedict and you, Tyler, for the group that was assembled 2 weeks ago regarding all things council. I'm probably one of only a handful in Norwalk that's truly interested in the various models of local government in Connecticut. So I want to thank you. I have to confess, I felt vindicated by the comments made around minority party representation, which, as you all know, is near and dear to my heart. I hope the caliber of speakers and discussion continues when we move to the mayor's office and the executive city management component, I think in a week or so, a couple weeks or whatever. Because at a time when we're seeing executive abuse of power at a national level on both sides of the aisle, it can't be stressed enough how important it is to have a strong and diverse legislative branch versus a single party that can be perhaps bullied into political submission behind closed doors. So I just want to say I thought the discussion 2 weeks ago was amazing, which just kind of shows what a sad person I am. But I thought it was fascinating to see how different the municipalities are, and I thought it was excellent discussion. So, Mr. Benedict, I want to thank you for that, for rounding up those folks. It was very, very good. So that's all I have for tonight. Happy thoughts.
Stay warm.
Thank you, Lisa. And there's nothing wrong at all with nerding out on all things municipal government. So thank you for joining us. I do want to I guess maybe just note for anyone else watching. Well, first of all, we have one other attendee. I'm not sure if that person. I don't see a hand raised. Just here observing. Tonight's meeting is remote only. I don't see any other panelists there. For anybody watching the recording, there was an illness for city staff that precluded us from meeting in person. So we are fully remote tonight, but plan to be back in person, live and in person at our next meeting. So being done with public participation, we now move on to new business. So this was the meeting where we were going to discuss, what we heard much about at our panel discussion, and I echo Steve's thanks, Lisa's rather thanks to Steve. That was such a helpful panel. It was great to hear from peers and people who are doing this in other communities. So tonight we were gonna discuss the structure of the council. So kind of take some of the information we'd heard from that last meeting, along with some of the public comments that we've received so far around council, which have, largely been, council related, term length, right? So we've heard from a number of people, both in the public and among our elected officials who were in favor of moving the common council term length from 2 years to 4 years. There's the issue of minority party representation. We can discuss compensation or stipends. We heard from a number of people on that issue. And then I'm just looking at my notes quickly. We'd heard from I don't remember if this is from the same person multiple times or if this was from multiple people, but there were requests for more interaction between council members and the public. And we had heard from, I think we've gotten a couple comments about increasing the size of the council. So those are some of the bigger issues that I had in my notes that we've received comments about and that we've heard from other folks from. Steve, did you have anything you wanted to share before we start discussing, or as far as how we start tackling this?
No, I thought you should start just going down the line on some of the issues that we laid out. I've also done a couple of comparative charts that I can get over to you if they're useful tonight as we get into the discussions. That would be I'd be happy to share them and get them out to you later tonight or tomorrow. I can tell you that one of the charts lays out the forms of government in probably the top 30 communities. It's a little deeper than I normally go. I usually go with the top 20. I kind of end at Middletown as a rule, but I went beyond Middletown just to give you a sense of how the government structures work, how many members, whether there's NPR and no NPR, what the terms of office are in those communities, what the legislative bodies look like in those communities. And the second chart is a chart on compensation. I promised Ed Camacho, because I eluded a question that he had raised last week regarding, if I may, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
Regarding the compensation issue and whether there's a distinction between compensation and stipends, salaries and stipends. And it's, I've done some research in it. I will have a full-blown memo on it, but I'm hoping, and I'll talk about that in a minute, as Commissioner Levin is aware, and I know he's aware that I have not talked to the majority leader about this issue, but the reason I didn't talk to the majority leader is I got a call from one of the leaders of one of the municipal groups in the state who got a call from the majority leader, and we're beginning to formulate a strategy for addressing the compensation issue at the state level. And so we've done a lot of outreach from CCM to communities throughout the state to figure out how they've dealt with it. There aren't too many, because frankly, it's only, I'd say, the top tier cities, because you're not paying people to, the compensation goes down to, well, I mean, in the top 20 are the communities with compensation, but a good 8 of them do not have compensation. So it was about 12 of the top 20. But once you start going below 20, there's no interest in this, because you have either town meetings or RTMs, et cetera, and they're not paying town meetings and RTMs to serve as legislative body members. So we are beginning to develop a strategy. I'll keep you up to date on it. It's an issue I've cared about for a long, long time, because I think it's an issue that should be dealt with on the local level. And I don't know why legislative salaries are distinguishable from executive salaries for purposes of going to referendum. So John got the ball, Commissioner Levin got the ball rolling with the majority leader. I apologize for not talking to him, but there was no need for me to bother him at this point, because we're all connected in terms of how we're going to develop the strategy. So I hope in 2 weeks to give you a little update. I'm sure that it's not going to be resolved in 2 weeks, but it's going to be complicated. It's a simple issue. And to me, it should be simply accomplished, but that's not the way things always work in the legislature. So I just wanted to let you know it's being addressed, and it's one I've cared about for a long time, long before this commission met. I probably talked about it. Tyler and Carl probably let you know, and Rick, that I probably talked about this before the commission 2 years ago. I talk about every commission I'm involved in. I think it's a horrible issue that needs to be resolved. So that being said, if that doesn't happen, then we have to tackle, if you want to tackle the issue, and that's an issue you have to decide up front, is there a distinction between compensation and stipend? And it really depends is the answer. And it depends on a number of things. If your compensation, you think of compensation as a salary, a set figure that you get for the year, and that is true. Bridgeport's more of a reimbursement. New Haven has a salary $5,000. Waterbury for the members $4,000, leaders $6,000. That's a set price. You get paid every week or every other week, whatever the the amount is for the weekly pay or the biweekly pay, and that's what you get for the year. That's compensation. You get a W-2, you pay taxes on it. It's a salary. And so the issue is if you call it a stipend, which is what they do in Middletown, does that take you out of the compensation arena? And the answer really largely depends on what the stipend is. The stipend could be identical to compensation. If you have a $9,000 stipend and you divide it by 12 or you divide it by, 52 or whatever it is that you divide it by, it's no different than a salary. It's no different than the compensation you receive as compensation, as a salary for your position. There's only one little case, a Superior Court case, that basically said that there was no distinction, but it was of a town that had a base salary for their members, very low salary, by the way, very similar to Norwalk, a very negligible compensation. But they ruled that the stipend, because it was something that could be used for any expense that you may have, personal or official, was the equivalent of compensation. If you establish a stipend and define it as a fund from which you could draw money for demonstrable and tangible items that you have spent money on, daycare for a child, your bus ride back and forth to town hall, your parking, the gasoline you use to move around the city. I don't know if a nice suit at Brooks Brothers would qualify, but those kinds of things, and you can show that it is related to your function as a member of the council, and you define the stipend that way, you could probably get around the compensation statute. Ed, I think that's, or Commissioner Camacho, I think that's kind of it in a nutshell.
So if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck.
Exactly right. It's the duck theory, and that's it. My hope will be, and we will know before we're done, or we may not, or we'll know sometime during the process, actually, because it's a long session. I think they run till June. We will know whether this legislation succeeds or doesn't succeed before we're done. Even if we send our interim report, draft report to the council at the end of May, and the legislature does something in the last day of the session. Let's hope it's not a rat, but last day of a session, then the council could always send it back to us if that's what everybody pleases to do. So that's the issue on compensation. Let me make one minor correction, and I won't name names or name towns, but one of the speakers, who's a very dear friend and a client, most of them are dear friends and clients I've done work for, just about all of them around the state, made a statement last week about she was not friendly toward a minority party representation, and made the argument that that NPR creates losers out of winners. And I can tell you, in that town and in most of the towns that have NPR, that the party, both parties are capped, or all parties, the independent party in your town would be capped at the maximum number of candidates who could serve. So if the maximum number of candidates who could serve in an at-large environment is 4, then you can nominate and no more than 4. So if there's 6 seats and you could fill 4 of them with a majority party, it's capped at 4. So no one loses except the losers. No one loses in the majority party by nominating 6. The spectacle would be you run 6 people in the majority party, all 6 of them finish ahead of everybody else, and the last 2 get lobbed off. That would be an example of the theory that was discussed, but that doesn't happen in that town. And I can't think of any. There were some towns where it did happen, and we've fixed it over the years, where we've gotten rid of that. So the way we've tried to deal with NPR throughout most of the state is to max the number of people you can nominate so that you don't have the spectacle of a winner losing.
But you do have, but with all due respect, you do have winners versus losers. I mean, you do have winners, losers, because if you can only run 4 candidates, but in other words, you're limited to 4, but there's 6 seats. If you ran
You're losing
6
the
candidates,
opportunity to fill
you're
those
losing those 2.
seats. Yeah.
So it is. So what she said is technically accurate, because you're limited in the number of people you can run, even though they're not by the number of seats, but by virtue of the minimum.
Well, it's legal. It's
representation.
not legally accurate, but it's accurate from a perspective. Yes. Yeah,
Why
if
is
you
there
live in
a
a town
lot-
where you think you can win all the seats and there's a law saying you can't have all the seats, yes, you're losing the seats that you can't have.
Right. So I think that's what she meant. I mean, she may not have meant it in a legal sense. She may have meant it. She probably meant it in a practical or factual sense.
Possibly.
Doug, did
I hope so.
do you have a question? And then Carl?
Yes, if we're gonna, I like this, so we're kind of really micro focusing on something. So to get the answers back, so I like that we're starting this, so this relates strictly to this. Do you have, if you're compensated at a certain level, and I say this because jokingly, after all the years they did on the council, I used to kid the personnel director going, do I get a pension out of this deal? All right, because I would get a check from the city of Norwalk. And I said, well, I guess technically I'm an employee, but for $46, you're not going to get anything. That was, it used to be a running joke with me. But on the serious side, though, if you're compensated at a certain level and considered an employee of the city of Norwalk, even though you're elected, do you participate in employee benefits of any kind? Or can you be segregated out of that?
Well, you could be segregated out, depends on how it's structured. You could pay into it also. I know that there are communities where members of legislative bodies that have received compensation have opted into the retirement system, and so that they could have their time accumulate, and maybe after they leave the council, after 10 years, they take a job in the city, and then all of a sudden they've got 10 years as their baseline for a pension somewhere down the line. I was corporation counsel, and I was informed that I could take my 10 years on the board of aldermen, combine it with my 3 years as corporation counsel, and be eligible for a pension. I'd have to pay in because I'd never had money taken out when I was corporation counsel or as an alder. And for 8 of the 10 years, I wasn't compensated, but I was an alder, and the time would be allowed. So yes, so you have to carefully manage how you create the structure.
All right, so that should be part of the discussion at some point. I want to make sure that got interjected as consideration as we move through that. And the other one had to do with the minority representation. When I asked the question in Hartford, but if the majority party wins and another candidate wins but was cross-endorsed by the majority party, does that count as majority rule or does that count as minority rule?
If you are endorsed by the party that wins or achieves the minority, that is NPR,
Right.
And you are the same affiliate member of the party that's the majority, you are counted as the member of the minority party. You cannot attend the caucus of the majority party. The best example of that,
being elected.
What's that?
I'm talking about being actually elected.
Yeah, no. Well, everybody's elected, but the
No. I guess it's not who you can caucus with. I'm a member of Party X, and Party Y is a majority party and wins the election handedly. But I was cross-endorsed by Y. I am a member of X, but Y cross-endorsed me. And because of their cross-endorsement, I win. So the question is that legit minority representation, or is that a subversive way of trying to get around it?
Yeah, that's
You
an
would still be a
interesting
party of
question.
X, right? You would still be a member of the X party.
Yeah, but I've been cross-endorsed by a majority party.
But it doesn't really matter. They've
Doesn't
endorsed
matter.
you as a member of X. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
That's
That's what you're registered as.
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily. In Waterbury, you had the independent party that was comprised of Republicans and Democrats. Now, they weren't no one was cross-endorsing anybody because everybody hated each other. So there was no cross-endorsement. But you had Democrats and Republicans in one party. The mayor of Bridgeport, of New Britain, ran coalition slates. So she had Democrats, unaffiliated, and Republicans running on her slate. And so while the Democrats were the minority party, there were actually a majority of the council at one point were actually enrolled Democrats, although they were not de jure Democrats for purposes of the constituted majority. In the cross endorsement, Doug, I don't have an answer. I could talk Secretary of State, but I think in the cross endorsement and you're elected, well, it's interesting because I just was tripping myself up. My sense is you would end up coming in if you're on the slate of the minority party and you win, you would probably be recognized as a member of the minority party. However, if by cross endorsement you are on both slates, is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, yes.
Meaning you would caucus with the Democrats if you were a Republican?
You could, if you're a Democrat, you're on if you're on the Democratic slate and you're enrolled Republican, for purposes of counting the majority, you are a Democrat. You're in the Democratic caucus. That's the way it's worked in New Britain for years. That's the way it worked in Waterbury for years. The interesting question would be, if you're endorsed by two parties, where do you end up? I suppose it would be dependent upon how many votes you got. And if you got enough votes to qualify in the majority party, you would be in that party. But I don't know why the party, if you're on another slate, and most of the cities have caps on the number of people they can endorse, I don't know why they would give one of their seats up to you when you could be doing their dirty work on the other side.
Well,
You see my
there are
point?
cross endorsements all the way around. I mean, Noak's got a long history of it, trust me. So what I'm trying to understand, though, the big picture here is, Ed, what do you say? Ed's a Democrat. He's in charge of the party, and he says, "I want to cross endorse Kemp said, even though he's a Republican." I'm not putting words in your mouth, Ed.
No, I do.
Well,
I
feel free to
would
So
do
want
it.
I go out and run, and I get X amount of votes on the Republican line, and I get X amount of votes on the Democratic line, but the Democratic line pushes me over. The amount of votes I got on the Republican line pushes me to win. Otherwise, I would not have won. So is that truly minority representation if elected that way?
I think, I mean, with all due respect, Steve, if I can answer that question, I think that, and I'm not answering it legally, but I think we had a situation where there was 8-7, and I think it was Bruce Kimmel was the eighth Democrat who then decided to caucus with the Republicans. So it became 8-7 Republicans, and Republicans then elected the council president and were in the majority and assigned chairmanships and everything else. But he was still technically a Democrat, and it was still technically an 8-7 a Democratic Common Council. It was just that he chose to caucus with the Republicans. I don't think that made him a Republican. It just decided that for purposes of minority party representation, I don't think that would have made a difference. I don't think anyway.
No, but my question is, since we're talking about minority representation, add that one more in. He ran on the Republican line and also ran on the Democratic line.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that. Okay.
But
No,
Doug,
I said, I'm asking. I'm
Oh,
using
I
that
see.
situation.
Does that
I'm trying to use
happen
the situation.
when someone's cross endorsed? Are they on
wait,
both
hold on.
lines?
Doug, go
Oh,
back
sure.
to Mike Geek. When Mike Geek didn't get nominated by the Democrats and he ran on the Republican line in District B,
Right.
and he caucused with the Republicans, but he was still a registered Democrat. But he did not
Well,
run on the Democrat line. He ran on the Republican line. I can't remember the other Democrat that was also with him. But that has happened in Norwalk. That's why I'm saying, I think at that time, we weren't as versed in what Steve has brought to us tonight.
Yeah.
And we went with Mike Geek and this other one, caucusing at the time.
Well,
I-
I'm happy to look.
And they ran at large.
I guess I'm missing I'm not being clear what I'm trying to get an answer on. I didn't mean to belabor this. It doesn't mean simpler. I'm not talking about who you caucus with or anything. Don't care. I'm talking about minority representation is being discussed and that's been put into effect. So I'll bring
I
up the
don't know,
example
yeah.
why I asked the question. If the Working Families Party member that ran in Hartford for city council was cross-endorsed by the Democrats and won on the Democratic line, in other words, he got the most votes on the Democratic line, does that still qualify them as a minority party representation? That's my question.
If they are endorsed by the party and they get more votes than the next person, then they probably would qualify as a member of the majority party, even though they're not in the majority party. You're confusing me with cross endorsement because, as I said to you, that's a highly unlikely scenario if you have a cap on how many people you could run. I'm not sure a party would give up one of their seats to cross endorse somebody in that scenario, but they might. They might.
Well, I
yeah.
guess, but my question, so say, you have, Norwalk, you have the 10 district seats, right? You're going to have 2 people per district, running as Democrats. I mean, well, I guess in that scenario, you would have to, I mean, either the party is, no, you'd have to straight up endorse someone, but I'm trying to think of a situation where you would be cross endorsing someone where you didn't have a candidate for the seat, right? I mean, if you were cross endorsing someone, say the Democrats, I mean, Rick, the Democrats have cross endorsed you. Do you show up as on the Democrat line on the ballot? I don't even remember.
Yeah, he does.
You do.
Yeah, he does. He
both.
shows up on both.
Both.
On both.
When you're cross endorsed, you're on both lines.
You're on both
Okay.
lines.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it depend
And
on the
so-
number of votes you get from one party versus the other? I mean, would that be a distinction?
No, because let me tell you, and Ned Lamont has had cross endorsements, and to win the governorship, you add both lines.
Yes. Right.
To determine the number of votes
winner.
you received. For purposes that's not critical in the governor's phase in terms of what party he or she is, but if you're doing the legislative contest, I suppose the candidate would ultimately make the choice if they were somehow cross endorsed. But I can call. I mean, look, this is a very esoteric question. I feel like we're in Alice in Wonderland here, going down a rabbit hole. I think if we look at NPR, I'm more than happy to call Secretary of State and get a definitive answer on that for you. I think it's highly unusual in light of the way NPR is usually constructed, with a cap on the number of people who could serve in the majority party. So I think as a, unless you tell me it's so totally different here.
No, I'm just
yeah.
I'm just trying to find out if we're going through the process that there's not a way to subversively go around this. All right.
Yeah.
That, oh yeah, here's an end run, how you can do this and still have your member, even though they're not a member, on your ticket. That's all I'm trying to figure out.
It does illustrate. It does illustrate how the elegance of having a Democrat, not having minority party representation, because if you're elected, you're elected. End of story.
Mhm.
And if that's what the people want, that's what the people want.
Well, that's true. Ed.
And so you don't have to do all these machinations to sort of figure out if there's some way to get around them or not, or whatever, because really it becomes an issue of what the people want.
Yeah,
I
but
lived with
I have a question.
Yeah, Carl, you had your hand up, please.
Well, and it's not related to this, it's related to something else, but just so I understand it in my pea brain here. In Norwalk, if we're running for council in your district, it's the top 2 vote getters that move on into council. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's correct, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing, let's say, I'm a Republican, so I'm running for a Republican in District D, where I live. But there is another person that's running in the same district, not necessarily as a Republican, but maybe they're running as a Democrat. And so I become the second or the third highest vote getter in District D, but with the cross endorsement from the other party, if I add that line on to the number of votes that I got, it could conceivably move me into the second spot to be then move on to council, correct?
That's happened many times. Sure.
Yeah, exactly.
It happens often with the working family line with the Democrats,
Right.
Yeah.
or too much with the independent Norwalk. But then again, independent's a new party, you know.
So in
coming
regards
strong.
to this discussion, then Rick, what would I be?
You
I
would
didn't
be
win it. I
Republican.
didn't win it on the Republican line. What pushed me into the council seat was the number of votes I got from the working party folks.
So I think the state actually has somewhere either in Title VII or Title X. I think it's Title VII when they're talking about elections,
Mhm.
and they talk about minority party representation. And
Title IX, Title IX.
okay, sorry,
That was close.
and they I believe Steve, you can correct me, but I believe it's simply whatever party you are registered for.
I believe so too.
That is what you are. So it doesn't matter who votes for you. It doesn't matter what
Okay.
party you know, what line you appear on. It is only what party you are registered as.
I agree with that. And that's the way
That
we
would make
it's in
sense.
Norwalk. That's exactly the way it's fallen in Norwalk.
So the discussion of cross endorsement is not relevant to the issue of minority party representation, I believe.
But remember one thing, John, that, you know, up until a few years ago, our minor parties weren't as strong as they are now. We're now getting more candidates on the minor party lines, you know, as far as working family and independent. I mean, so things have changed. So it's something like Steve is going to check on that we are going to have to look at, because it could make a big difference in minority party representation if you have 3 or 4 more parties instead of just the 2 major ones that we've mostly.
So yes, and in fact, the towns that do have minority representation, or minority party representation, have found in the past, Steve, you can correct me on this as well, very clever ways to game the system. And there have been people who have re-registered to a different party and then, run on that, as that person, whatever. And the people who were seeking to arrange the outcome did it in such a way that they were able to meet the requirements of their charter, but only to the letter of the law and definitely not the spirit. Is that?
But
You know,
to Rick's point,
My
does it-
experience, I'm sorry.
does it depend on the how many people are registered in a certain party? Does party registration matter? That determines what's
No.
doesn't.
Isn't that how you determine what a minority party is?
That's what I thought, but I'm
No,
not
no,
sure.
you're the way you determine a minority party is by the number of the outcome of an election. So that one party wins a majority in the election, and they're
But what if
capped.
there are 3 parties?
Well, if you don't have, if you have a split, then there is no majority party. Then you have a
No, but I'm
split.
saying if you have a
Minority-
majority party, but there's a Republican, let's say in Norwalk, and an independent party, those are the minority parties.
I'm not talking about the enrollment of the parties that say the Democrats are dominant or the Republicans are dominant. Or
I
the
see what
Working
you're saying.
Family Party.
You're saying
I'm talking about the
who
outcome
comes
of an
in short
election.
the vote.
That's how it's determined. So
So
it
if
has
the
nothing to do
independents
with
have
registration.
like 6 votes and the Republicans have 600 and the Democrats have
Yeah.
1,000,
Well,
the independents are the
yeah.
minority party?
In Hartford, the Republicans have more enrolled people in the Republican Party than the Working Families Party. But in the elections, the Working Families Party achieves more votes than the Republicans. And that's how they're represented on the council, and the Republicans are not. It's
Right.
really the outcome of the election.
But
The
if you
number
have
of-
Democrats, Republicans, independents, who's the minority party?
Oh, well, the minority party would be a combination of those people who are not in the majority. In Hartford, there's an independent and 2 working family members. In the Waterbury Independent Party, back in the early part of the century, there were 3 affiliated Democrats and enrolled Democrats and 2 enrolled Republicans in that party, but they were one caucus, regardless of the party.
So the 2 lesser
Now, those
parties would have
caucuses don't really revolve very well. In Hartford, I don't know the independent, who's actually historically a Democrat, meets with working family or not.
But
historically,
the
goes back and
two
forth.
lesser parties would have to vie for who was going to get the representation on the city council.
No, they could all have representation on city council depending on the outcome. So if you cap your majority at 4 and
Yeah.
you have 3 other seats, and you will then decide who the minority is on the basis of who had the most votes, and the second most votes, and the third most votes.
Okay.
And so if you had a socialist with X plus 1, a communist with X plus 2, and a conservative with X, all 3 of them would get elected. And the guy at the bottom might be the Working Families Party or the Republican or something like that, or the Democrat, depending on the city. It's all on the basis of how many votes you get in the election.
So Steve,
then
when
what
you
you-
say cap, are you talking about the number of seats? Like I could only,
Yeah, I said this earlier. The way most towns deal with it, and Ed was saying that it effectively is creating losers, but the
Right.
way most communities do it, so you don't have a technical loser on the ballot, is if you have no more than 4 of any party can serve, and that the remaining 3 seats go to the members of whatever minority parties are out there running. It could just be the Republicans or the Democrats. That's your cap. You can only nominate enough people to serve the maximum number of people any party could serve. So the Republicans would nominate 4, the Democrats would nominate 4, the Working Families would nominate 4. The top 4 end up determining who the majority party is. Has nothing to do with enrollment. It's all results of an election.
so
That
if you
much I
cap it
know.
at 4, but you've got 7 seats, then there's 3 seats would be filled by what would be determined as a minority group party.
Yeah, well, that's why I think minority party representation is a very, very bad way to explain this law. It's really a cap on majority representation.
Mhm.
And so those who are not of the quote majority party that achieves a victory in that election are then represented on the council in order of how they did in the election.
I hate to belabor the point, but what of the first 4, 3 are Democrats, 1's a Republican, of the top 4 vote getters?
Well, the Republican would definitely qualify, but wouldn't be. And let's say the 5th person is a Democrat. That 5th person helps form the majority, and that's your cap. And
So the 5th person
who
goes
gets
to the 4th, becomes 4 of the Democrats, and then the other people.
correct.
I got you.
We had in Hamden over years, there was a Republican who always came in number 1, but was always in the minority party. She got the most votes citywide, but no one else in the party did that well, or at least 5 members didn't do that well, and she ended up, in the minority as a minority party representative, even though she had more votes
Right.
than any of the Democrats. In Detroit, she'd be president of the city council. The person who gets the most votes in an election is the president of the city council in Detroit. But in Hamden, you just get a minority seat on the council.
Interesting.
Yeah.
John, you had your hand up, and we'll go John and then Carl.
Yeah, I want to mention, we've really discussed 2 important subjects so far. One is compensation and the other is minority party representation. And we have bounced back and forth. And I'm happy to do any one of those, but I feel, that we kind of left compensation hanging. Are we going to come back to it?
I thought we were going to move on from compensation until
I
we
was
hear
just
from you.
doing a backgrounder for you,
Yeah.
so this was not meant to
So-
be a dialogue.
So John, my question, and
Okay.
I think you make a good point. My question is the compensation question. How is it, and you guys that have served on council would know this. And Rick, how is a council person who gets paid by the city of Norwalk? How are they considered on the books in the city of Norwalk? Are they an employee, not an employee? What legal status do they have that they get money from the city of Norwalk to be on city council?
We're employed.
Who said that?
They
I'm
take
sorry.
taxes out. We
Doug-
get a
Doug said
monthly
that.
check. We got a monthly check, and we're considered an employee without benefits.
Yeah, I mean,
Because we're
you
considered
could have
part-time.
them. I mean, I have the lady who helps me in Greenwich is part-time, but she gets paid and she gets taxed, she gets a paycheck from the city, but she doesn't get benefits. You know, you're not part of the retirement plan or the healthcare plan or whatever. So, I mean, that's obviously an additional cost. It's something to consider. But I think what you would probably want to do, or what you could do, Carl, if it was a concern, would be, I mean, you would pay the council people, whatever it is, and then that would just be it. I mean, unless someone decided that they should also be part of the, you know, you're paying into retirement and you're getting 401k match or something like that. I mean, that's a different
Yeah.
discussion.
And a lot of municipalities have that, their own that people can pay into, but so that leads to just the other question. So, and Doug, you would know this, and Ed would know it. So you win and you're on council, you get paid. Comes income tax time to file. Do you include that in your overall gross income for the year?
Yes,
All right, so you're paying taxes on that lofty $6,000 a year or whatever it is.
The taxes are being
600.
deducted from your check. So
Yeah.
if your check was 60 bucks, you get 49. I never collected my check, but yeah, that's the way it works.
Okay, but you could push yourself up a little bit on your total income, even though it's not a lot of money. You could
Salary of
push yourself
600
up a
bucks.
little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've just taken that into consideration when we think about compensation of increasing a council member's compensation more. There's more to it than just, okay, you're getting paid to fulfill your seat. And then we've heard people talk about that, you know, it costs money now because of daycare, travel, gasoline, yada, yada. So there's other components in my head that figure into that. So that's why I asked the question.
Well, and I mean, Steve, correct me if I misinterpreted, you know, the opening of the discussion about compensations. But I mean, is this something where we should wait to hear back to see what happens at the state level, to see what happens with the majority leader or CCM before we dig into it more? Because that, I mean, it could make it irrelevant, or is that something that we need to figure out regardless?
Good point.
That's your call. I mean, I think the threshold question is, do you want to address the issue of compensation either way? Whether it is made easy by doing it through the budget, easier by making it do it through the budget, or it's as difficult as it is right now, where you'd have to do it in the charter, as I've told you, with a baseline salary with a COLA. So you get through the referendum that way. So the first question is, do you want to address compensation either way? If you don't want to address it, it makes no difference what the legislature does. I will be doing what I have to do to change that law, regardless of where you want to go. But it's really up to you to decide whether you want to modify the compensation. You do need to change your charter if you want to modify your compensation. If you want to leave it the way it is, you leave it the way it is.
Yeah.
So if the legislature changes it so that you can make it a budgetary item, you can leave the $600 a year as a baseline and permit the increase over the 600 to be handled by budget. But
that's what I was going to say, right? So if it's a matter, if something changes so that it can be dealt with by budget, we would have to make minimal changes, if any, right? Because then
that's correct.
Then it's just dealt with through the budget. If it's something else, it's got to, we would have to have a much larger discussion, and then it's probably going to be one of these like pull it out and make it a separate question on the ballot kind of things.
Right.
I didn't hear a lot. I didn't update the grid, but I don't believe there was a groundswell. Correct me if I'm wrong, everybody, including the former town chair. I don't think I heard a groundswell from the council asking for increases in compensation, but I could be wrong.
Not this time around, but the previous time around they did.
Yeah. So, but that's the first question you have to decide. Do you want to tackle it? And the two alternatives are to assume that the law doesn't change and you'd have to structure it the way I've done in other communities. Or if the law does change, keep your baseline, don't change it, keep your baseline and allow for additional compensation to be approved in the budget process.
So council salaries, Rick and Ed, what line item do they come out of in the city's overall budget?
Legislative.
Legislative, okay.
So on this question of compensation, let me just give a quick update. I personally am highly optimistic that this state statute, 7-460, can and will get repealed in the current legislative session. I called up Joe DeLong, who is the executive director of the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. He is the one that spoke to Steve. And I explained to him what we were dealing with. And he said that he had been executive director for 10 years. He had never heard of this law. He was astonished the law even existed. But he said that based on that he would look into it, but based on the description of the law, that it's something the CCM would be quite anxious to have removed because it frees up municipalities to run their business in the way they consider to be best at the local level, and simplifies the governance process. I put in a call to Betsy Guerra as well, which is at COST, the Council of Small Towns, or whatever it is. Have not heard back, but she did get my inquiry. Joe DeLong works with her continuously on everything. And Joe is in the process of reaching out to Bob Duff and to find out what he would like them to do. But in all honesty, I mean, I've never served in the legislature. I've never even served on the council, but you know, the language of such a bill would be simply to, you know, Section 7-460 is hereby repealed. And, you know, it has no budget impact, you know, no one's job is changed. It does absolutely nothing, and just simply frees the towns to, you know, go about their business. So anyway, I'm optimistic, but of course I'm a novice. And
I think Steve is going to say it's got to be a little bit more than that, because
Yeah, exactly right. Number one, most of the bill will remain in effect because it does talk about other issues of compensation. And I agree with you, John, Commissioner. I do believe it's a simple fix, but nothing is ever simple in the legislature. You've got interactions between CCM and cost. I'll call Betsy, by the way. I know Betsy very well. There's the interactions are very complicated. On this, I imagine cost may not, and I don't want to say this because cost is a wonderful organization, but it's the Council of Small Towns. Remember what I said earlier? It's the top 20 towns that are affected. CCM represents all the towns and cities. Cost just represents the small towns. So I can't imagine it's an item that cost will get deeply involved in, but Cost's attorney is my co-counsel in the Stanford project I'm working on right now, and he and I have talked about this. So we're going to try to do that, but it's still complicated because CCM has a wide agenda, and I'm not saying that they're going to ignore this, but I can't imagine of the 25 items, let's say, that this will be number one. It's a relatively simple fix, but we have to make sure that we keep on it. I will be talking to Joe. Joe has been for a long time my desire to change this law, because again, I think it's anti-home rule. It's just autonomy for local government should be able to make this kind of decision and shouldn't have your local legislators treated differently than other officials. The town clerk doesn't have to go to referendum. The tax collector doesn't have to go to referendum if he's elected. You know, the mayor doesn't have to go to referendum. And so I'm hoping it's happening, but your enthusiasm is wonderful. I am deeply zealous and devoted to this, John. But I will keep my fingers crossed. I will pray to Zoroaster, Yahweh. I'll call the Pope. I'll do anything I have. I'd love to get this thing taken care of, but it's not as easy as it sounds. That's all I'm saying.
So if I'm hearing this right, if this is repealed, it allows the cities and what we're talking about to be determination of whether our city council or elected officials get more money or don't get more money. The way it currently stands, it's ruled by the state.
No. It's ruled by, the rule is you can do it. The city can raise, unfortunately, we have a cap. I'd have to look at the section, see how it's written.
That's okay.
Right now you have this compensation, but the city can already put money in the budget, I suppose, unless there's a restriction in the charter. And I don't recall that there's a restriction. Could supplement the $600 a year and raise it from there. And it goes through the budget, and everything else is enacted in effect for July 1. But the compensation increases for the council have to go on the next municipal election ballot. So you can raise it in the budget, but the budget is not effective until the referendum approves the salary increase.
Okay,
That's the
so-
way the state statute works.
So the bottom line is it's not approved to the electorate approved
Until you like in a municipal election.
in a
year.
municipal election. Gotcha.
Yeah.
For council members only.
Yeah, if that's what
Council
it
member,
said, right?
that's
Yeah.
exactly right. Council members only.
So it'd have to be defined on the ballot as such.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, in the memo that I circulated last week, I suggested actually removing the specific language from section 4-7, paragraph C. Take out the $600. Basically the language says, accept the salary of council members. This is in our charter. And I suspect many other towns also have council compensation in their charter. I know weeks ago in an earlier discussion, somebody among us had suggested we should get council compensation out of the charter completely. That's really where I stand as well. And I think that it should not be in the charter, that this is something that cities should be dealing with and not in the charter. And it's an ossified way of dealing with it. But basically just take out the remainder of the paragraph in section 4-7C. And it says, the council will select assign the compensation for all elected officers, except the salary of the council members, which shall be set at $600 per annum.
So if it was removed from the charter, then the council people would vote on their increase or not.
There's multiple ways to do it. I think if the charter doesn't mention it, then it becomes the responsibility of the legislative body. I'm guessing, Steve. How
That's
do
what I would
other
guess.
towns do this?
Well, you put the council in a very difficult position because they don't have line item control. So if you take in New Haven, if you took it out of the charter, the aldermen would put it back in the budget. They don't have to go to, they'd have to go to referendum, but they have it in the charter. By the way, John, most of the cities have it in the charter because both mayoral and council salaries tend to be controversial. In Hartford, we did a baseline for the mayor. In Waterbury, we did a baseline for the mayor. In New Haven, we have a baseline for the mayor. Same is true of their councils in all those communities, because you don't want to end up in a situation where they're battling each other and no one gets an increase. And that was a situation, I think, in Waterbury where there hadn't been an increase for 25 years. And that's why we did the same thing is true in Hartford. So you want to make sure that there's some baseline that's been approved, and then you may have the ability to approve beyond that. But if you take it out, particularly in a community where the council doesn't have line item control, they may end up without a salary altogether.
Then
Sorry, John. Doug, Doug had his hand up. I didn't know if it was a kind of residual or if it was a new hand raised.
You could only wish it was. Oh my goodness. I give you some past history. Two things. The mayor's salary used to be in the charter also. It was eliminated at some point underneath Mayor Freese's term, and it was only like $100 more than the council's salary at the time. The city has underneath, and I don't know if it changed, you guys don't, as far as I know, didn't change that, has an ordinance list. Ed, you're familiar with that, Rick, and that on that list is the mayor's compensation. It is the city clerk, town clerk is on there because they're every other year, every 2 years, along with department heads are on that list. So there's a mechanism inside the city to allow the council to vote on salary increases for individual department heads and the mayor. It's a question of, and I thought Mr. Merrick told me in the beginning that there was no way of eliminating it from the charter. I was the one who brought that up early on, which simplifies everything. And then move it over to the ordinance list and let the council deal with however they want to vote themselves a raise or not. Because it's presently underneath its existing condition, it's not even cost effective to print the check and mail it to people for $46,000.
The council has no line item control. That's the problem.
They do on the ordinance list.
All they do on the ordinance
Board
list.
of Estimate has to fund that ordinance list.
Ah,
All right, but the ordinance list, though, the salaries approved by the city council. All right,
The
And,
chart, so it's not in the budget, it's the code of ordinances sets the salaries?
it's called the ordinance list. All right, and it's unless you guys change the last one, it's been and there are certain positions within the city of Norwalk, the council, because the mayor's supposed to recommend increases to it for certain ones that he's responsible and doing reviews for. Am I correct, Ed? I don't think anything's changed.
I
Right.
don't know. I mean, it sounds right
Okay.
because
Yeah, right.
because
When
that's
they-
happened and the Board of Estimate has had no say in it, so it must be correct.
Right.
So is
You
this
just-
ordinance list mandated by the charter?
Yeah, yes, as
It is.
Really?
far as I know.
I don't remember that.
I don't
If not,
remember.
it's,
that either.
if not, it's an
Anybody,
ordinance.
anybody from the
ordinance,
last
but it's
charter
there.
commission?
I'll have to do some research for you guys. Rick, tell me, I mean, Rick, you're part of that, right?
I think they recently voted an increase for this registrar of voters, no? They recently.
Right, and that's on the
increased this-
ordinance list also.
That was
Correct.
on the ordinance list, yeah, and so we
Right.
didn't, and that was not, so they do have line item control in that regard, yeah.
So how's something get, Ed, how's something get to the ordinance list?
I think the mayor and the finance department
Right.
have to
It-
recommend it.
It's created, it's always been there as far as I know. I think the council created the ordinance or somewhere it was created. I'm just trying to bring that up. So we need to research that
Hmm.
because it's always been there. It's been modified to include certain individual, like when they went to, used to be an assistant to the mayor and then became chief of staff. That person was in the ordinance list. So,
So
I mean,
Doug,
I
Doug,
think,
in
I
a
think
way,
our town clerk there, Mr. McQuaid, is on that list, correct, Mr.
Yeah, but
McQuaid?
we're separated from certain things that are on the top of that ordinance list. I think if you look down at the bottom of that list are the elected ones of like register of voters and town clerk.
Right.
The other ones are all like, I believe corporation council and different department heads and things along those
Yeah.
lines.
And either way,
I
I
will
don't think
say
an
though,
ordinance, I
and
don't think an ordinance, that ordinance list can supersede state law though, as it relates to city
no, I
council.
believe it can't either. I also have to bring up too, with the register of voters increase, I'm not really sure what the procedure was to go to that point there either.
So-
Because there are 3 people on the bottom of that list and register of voters was the only one, so.
so in effect, as Ed said, the council doesn't have a line item approval, but council sort of does if it has approval of what goes on that ordinance list.
Yeah,
But
I
not as
gotta
it
tell you,
relates to- But
I
not as it
just feel
relates to their salaries, because the state law controls that.
yeah,
Okay.
I have to tell you, I just did a quick run through the charter and the term ordinance list doesn't show up in the charter. And then I went through the code of ordinances, did a quick run. This is a very quick run and couldn't find anything called the ordinance.
I
list.
don't recall us dealing with that the last time around, so.
No, it wasn't
Tyler?
there. And to Ed Camacho's point, to Commissioner Camacho's point, compensation has to, somewhere it has to go into the budget.
Yeah,
I don't know how you do compensation. You could have a list that may be a priority list. Some cities call it executive compensation or something like that, and it gets approved in the budget, but it has to get approved in the budget somewhere. So I don't understand how. I'll check and find out what the ordinance list is and how that works. But to Ed's point, it still has to comply with the statute.
Well, it would come, anybody who serves the mayor would come out of the mayor's list. The mayor would recommend to the Board of Estimate an increase for his office, whoever fell on the ordinance. It used to be the executive secretary, et cetera. The registrar of voters would petition on their own, same as I think Mr. McQuaid would petition on his own if he was looking for an increase. So,
It sounds like an executive and non-classified employee pay plan is what it sounds like to me. You have your union employees and you know how much they're getting paid based on.
yeah,
the
this is
collective
all, that's why corporation account, it was sensitive items that people were not
Unclassified,
part of
yeah.
the union. So, that's all.
Yeah, so they're unclassified. And that's a place where your compensation might be, but it ultimately has to go into the budget. Because it's funded
Yeah.
by the budget. And so ultimately, you'd have to have a referendum on the council component of it.
No.
And yeah, and all I want to say is again, it's your policy, you decide what you want to do. But if you take their salary out, there is no salary. Even the meager $600 a year would be gone. So my recommendation at minimal is to do a fix on that section, and any other compensation that may be permissible under law or something like that.
Yeah.
So that you can address it one way or the other going forward in the future. If the statute remains the same, you got to go to a referendum. If the statute changes, you can just do it in the budget. But then again, you don't have line item control. The real question is, what leverage do you have to persuade the mayor that this should go, and the Board of Estimate that this should go into the budget? That's the issue.
So Steve, I think to address the concern about potential elimination of council compensation, as I'd suggested a couple of meetings ago, we could take out the language that fixes the compensation and simply indicate that it should be assigned by the legislative, by the council in the normal course, with the provision that council member compensation will not be less than $100 per month, which simply doubles what it is now.
But that doesn't that hinge on the state changing the current arrangement?
Steve will tell you no, because this would be in the charter that would set a floor of 100. And if the charter is approved by the voters by, referendum, then so be it.
Yeah, John's right. If we were to make the change in the charter, then it's gone through a referendum. I have to say, the only element of a doubt, and I think I raised this at the meeting we had 2 weeks ago, is none of my provisions have ever been challenged, because I've known, who's going to challenge it. Most people think it's a reasonable position, but I don't distinguish between referendum where charters are approved and the next municipal election referendum.
Okay.
I can't imagine a court would say that distinction is worth knocking down a salary for, because it went through a charter revision referendum. Ed's a litigator, so he may disagree with me. I highly doubt whether that'd be the case, but I think that if it goes through the referendum process, I think it would be very difficult for a trier or a jury or whatever to rule against the increase. But if you modified it, right now it's $600 per annum. If you modified it with a different baseline, you passed it in the charter, then you can pass it in the charter. But it would be an interesting test, because you're talking about $100. We're talking about $100 a month or $100 per annum?
$100 a month. Ed's
Right.
already pointed out. Yeah.
No,
Yes.
right now it's 600, but I'm saying it would be an interesting test of the referendum process. If you can't get $100 a month through, you're not getting a referendum for more through, is what it comes down
My
to.
recommendation would be 1/15 of the mayor's salary with cost of living increases automatically.
The problem with that, Ed, I agree with you in concept. The problem is that then keeps council member compensation locked into the charter.
No, you can add language, or if the law changes on a state level, or any other salary as may be deemed appropriate and lawful.
Yeah, all the charters where I have formulas and methodologies also say you can do additional compensation.
Okay.
And so you can do it that way, because the provisions were set to deal with the conundrum of that statute. And so you do have that ability to change it. You can't get rid of it. So if the 1/15 is a standard, that would still be a minimal standard, and you can modify. You can on top of the COLA that you've gotten, you can modify it in other ways. But let me also point out, and remember, everybody needs to remember, and there's nothing we can do about this, is you don't get increases every year with a COLA. You only get increases prior to the commencement of your first year in office and your third year in office in a 4-year term. And that's not because of a statute, that's the state constitution. So the COLAs accumulate, but you can only get them twice during a 4-year term, or the beginning, prior to the 4-year term, and in the middle of the 4-year term.
So it could go up or down, but those are the only times that it go into effect.
That's the only time you could do
But
it.
what if you have 2-year terms?
You could only get it prior to the commencement of the 2-year term. So what you do in the election year, that's the budget, the July 1st of the election year budget would have an increase for the elected officials, the mayor, the council, et cetera, but they don't take effect for them until the commencement of the new term of office in December or January.
How many people think that the electorate actually knows what council members are compensated for and how much?
Not many.
I don't think they care.
Well,
I mean, I don't think
yes,
they care that they're not compensated. I think they care that they are too, and then the question is how much, but I don't think they care that they're not.
Okay, maybe we're saying the same thing. I just wonder if I stopped 20 people on the street and said, do you have idea of how much your person that goes to council and does all this work for the city and your district, do you have any idea how much money they are paid by the city for the work that they do? If they would have an answer.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I don't think anyone
Yeah,
really knows.
none of them would.
Not
They
really.
don't know, but they think we get paid. I'm telling you, those over the years.
What was
Rick
that,
knows
Doug?
They don't know how much we get paid, but most of them think we get paid. And then when
Okay.
you tell them, oh, $600, they go, oh, that's at a month. They go, no, that's a year. So, you know,
So here's my question.
I'm dating
to the-
myself.
Here's my question to the commissioners. We've now run around a lot of issues on compensation. Is there anything you want me to do? Is there a consensus in any direction as to what you'd like, if anything, or do you want to wait till the next meeting to make that decision? I'm just trying to, sorry, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to kind of move this. and
Agreed.
Figure out whether.
Yeah.
whether
No,
we're-
I mean, my inclination was to have this was to address this later, to see if we get some kind of clarity as to whether or not this is going to change at the state level, and then if that makes things easier for us or not. Otherwise, we're going to have to spend, an entire, if not multiple meetings discussing this, because you're gonna have to now talk about everything that goes into paying these people, how much it should be. And I mean, I think that's also I thought that also might be connected to, if we're gonna discuss NPR and the 4-year term, and that would kind of come in after the fact. So if you guys would like to continue to discuss compensation, we can, but I think we're probably gonna have to put off some of the other issues until another night.
I have Tyler, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just have a question for Stephen. Do you have any idea, look in your crystal ball down there? When do you think the state will deal with this issue? Because this body has a limited term.
Oh, no. I said this at the beginning of the meeting, that it's a long session. My guess on it, contrary to John's optimism, is that this is the kind of issue we're going to have to keep reminding people that they need to do something about. So I will talk to Joe later this week. I'll try to report to you in 2 weeks. I'll find out, do we have a sponsor? Have we gotten that far? Because the next step is he was going to talk to the majority leader and try to figure out if there's a path and what the path is and how we should approach it.
No, I asked
so-
that question because I would agree with Tyler until we find out what's happening at the state level. Okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
my only cautionary remark is we may not find out until the end.
Right, that's.
And
That's my point. That's
Yeah,
my-
that-
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's
Yeah,
my
but
concern.
as I said at the beginning, we may get this on the rebound back from the council. And we may not, if we don't address it till the end, by the end of May, we got to send this to the council. And the legislature doesn't get out until the first week in June. And if they deal with this late in the session, because I don't think it's going to be a priority bill, maybe I'm wrong, then we may lose our opportunity. So that's,
Well, then I would agree with Tyler that we don't necessarily have to finish it tonight. If you want to move it to the next meeting or a special meeting or whatever, I'm fine with that. I just throw that out for everybody. But if we decide to kind of table it for a while, I would at least like to know that we could do it whenever the legislature makes a decision or not. And you're
My
not
feeling
being,
is that if I could say, my feeling is that we've had a lot of discussion about this evening. I would like to hear from every single member of the commission to see what their sense is after this based on this conversation. And to at least have the parameters of some something that we could do on the expectation that we're not going to be able to really, that we're not going to have that much time after the state legislature acts to do much of anything. So if we can have a discussion now, at least hear people out. I know that we could fashion some language that will incorporate or include the state allowing us to do more. But I think at a minimum, we should, since we've talked about this a lot tonight, at least have a sense of what everyone else is thinking, and at least sort of keep that in the back of our minds going forward. Because I think we can do something. We could write language into the charter that takes into account anything else that we might be able to do based on what the legislature says 4 or 5 months from now, or at least 3 months from now. So, I mean, that's my, my thinking.
I think that's a good approach. I
Yeah.
think we should have a consensus or close to a consensus on what we would change, and then something happens at the state level, we can adjust, but at least we have something to work off of. So, Joe.
I was just wondering, Ed, you had mentioned 15% of the mayor's salary. Where did that number come from?
1/15,
1/15.
members of the
1/15.
city council.
150.
And so it's the mayor's salary, I'm not sure what it is, 130,000, I don't know what it is, maybe 140. But it seems like an elegant way of coming up with a number without it being entirely arbitrary, although it is arbitrary. But they're a co-equal branch, if you will, in some ways. And so you take the mayor's salary divided by 15, the mayor gets a cost of living increase, the city council would get that same cost of living increase. And so you're basically mirroring the mayor's salary and salary increases. That's the basis of it.
Okay.
Well, I guess that is kind of related to another thing that I thought we were going to maybe discuss tonight, but would be if you expanded the size of the council. Did you then change it so that if say you go to 20 people, now it's 1/20th? I mean, you would have to do that same kind of math?
I don't know, that might be a little bit more difficult.
Well, that is an interesting point, right?
Yeah, I
Size
think
of
that
the
might be more
council,
difficult. Yeah.
The size of the council and how that would impact the budget. Yeah.
What I would suggest is that it's 1/15 now, and whatever that 1/15 is, multiply it out over 20 people or 25 people,
Yeah.
or whatever you want to do.
Okay.
Because I think I think the bigger the council, the harder the work is going to be, because I think it's hard to get that many people to do one thing. And so it might be unfair to pay them less because the work has become harder in some ways.
Right. So Joe, did you have a follow-up? If not, I'll go to John, who has his hand up.
Yeah, just a gentle reminder. Some of us have suggested removing compensation from the charter, and the effect of that can be done without any action by the state to remove a single sentence from section 7-460. Okay, it's one sentence in the statute that applies to council members, must be approved by referendum. So the point here is, if it's still the discretion of the budgetary process to select the compensation for the council members, the question, that's the way it would be under the charter. And the goal of changing the state statute, repealing one sentence, is to not obligate the town to have a referendum for any increase in council compensation.
But you can accomplish that by doing exactly that. You can accomplish it by adding the language or such other or further compensation as may be deemed appropriate or lawful. You can accomplish that. But if you take it out of the charter, then the council gets 0 potentially.
Okay, potentially set a floor. That
Right.
that would be
So
easy.
what
I
we're
think that's
saying
what we're
is,
talking about.
what
Is
we're
setting
saying is the
floor.
minimum, that they get a minimum, and then we can do anything else.
Right.
That's all we're saying.
So you would
which
say a
I think is what it
compensation
should be.
level-
Yeah.
And you
I
would say a
do like that.
compensation level of X could never go below that.
You could go below that if that's what you decide to do based on what the state legislature allows you to do. If you add the language or such other or further compensation or whatever as the as may be deemed lawful, but at least you're setting a minimum if the state does not allow us to do anything else.
Right.
Right.
Do you guys feel that adding the language for COLA in this perspective?
Yeah, that would be the idea.
would
Yeah, they'll
be,
get a COLA.
appropriate? Okay.
Yep.
And what COLA would we tie that to?
The cost of living increase.
Yeah, but
Where the
which
mayor
level?
gets, you know,
National, state?
oh, I don't know how they do it. The mayor gets a COLA, however that's
Yeah,
done.
they'd use the same metric.
Yeah, we would use this. There's a metric, a
And that
northeastern
doesn't have to
metric.
be put in the
Use.
charter.
Well, you might want to put it in the charter so there's no argument about it, but you know,
Which we-
you have,
You mean
What
put in
I've
the
done is
charter
I-
which COLA?
well, we'd figure out which COLA it is. I'll look at the other charters, but what we've done is we've listed the charter, the COLA that affects New England, the New England portion of the country, has a different cost of living than, let's say,
Okay.
Wyoming.
Yeah,
And so we tie it to the regional COLA or such equivalent
Okay.
standards that may be established in the future. Because what we call it today, we may not call it 10 years from
Okay.
now.
right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, the COLA for different parts of the state of Connecticut's not the same.
That is probably true, but well, you could have a very nice COLA in Norwalk
It's
compared
very
to
targeted.
compared
I
to
will
Canaan.
answer that with no comment.
It's like the national minimum wage hasn't gone up in forever, but it's still pretty good in Wyoming.
Yeah,
Which is not very good in
Exactly
New York
right.
City.
Does anyone else have any thoughts then on setting a base level in the charter in that section in what is it 4.7 that we can kind of address now regardless of what happens at the state?
Yeah, I mean, just speaking personally, I like where Ed was going with it, and I think we
Okay.
should we draft that language that
Yeah,
Ed, you were
so-
talking about?
So there's 4 alternatives, if you don't mind. I could draft all 4, or the one of them wouldn't require no draft. One is Ed's 117th,
115.
15th, yeah.
115th model plus COLA. The second one is a total removal from the charter. I don't know if that's still an issue that you want to even examine, or leave the baseline or the number and allow for increases in accordance with law. And if the law changes, then you just have to go through the budget. If the law doesn't change, you have to go to referendum. And then the third was nothing, I guess. You just leave it as is. So those are the 3 alternatives. I could easily draft those so that you have them in front of you, so we have some alternatives.
My only comment would be, I'd rather see it eliminated, and that's just from my past experience. Twice, back, I think when Mayor Collins was in office, he wanted to increase the salary for the council from $600 to $1,200. The town voted it down by a wide margin, and probably down 6 years ago, it might even be longer. I'm losing
Yeah.
track of what things happened.
Yeah.
There was a formula and all that with a baseline that was proposed in the last charter revision, and that got voted down resounding. So every time you mention money, a dollar amount
Yeah.
in the charter for that revision, the public just reacts. All right.
That is true.
Well, yeah, they want to double their salary. Now they don't care whether it's $600 or $1,200.
I
And
think
that's
if
why I
it's
always thought the way you ever want to get around this, put on the elected officials issue of voting, they have to vote on it versus leaving it in the charter and trying to work around it because it gets too complicated.
if it's a standalone item on the ballot, it will fail.
It will fail, yes.
It's got to be part of a package
Well,
for it to have
And
any
depending on
chance.
what
of
the rest of
success.
the package is, that could bring the whole
the
package.
packages, that may fail too. So I
Right,
mean,
right. So you have to have an attractive package.
Correct.
That makes that sort of less of a problem.
Are you saying a big, beautiful package, or is that
Yeah,
what
it's
you're
a big,
saying?
beautiful package
You know-
with an American flag.
So where we're going, kids.
But you know, one thing I have to say that, you know, this is a municipal election this year. And when you put salaries or increases on the ballot at the same time as people are running, that just put that together to be a question, it just doesn't, it doesn't fly. And
That's
you
a
know
very
how
good
people
point.
are, you
That's a
know,
very good point.
say a councilman or a group of councilmen, you know, say something wrong the last week of October. I can almost guarantee you that there won't be any increases voted upon. It'll be shot down.
Well, if
It's
I
very
was,
just a tough time to do it. That's what happened with the increase of, you know, the 4-year term for the mayor and the
right,
town clerk in 2016. I mean, municipal election, it crashed and burned.
I think that with
Compensation was also on there also, and it crashed and burned.
with a reval the way it's gone and commercial properties being less valuable and residential properties being more valuable, people are looking at a 10% tax increase this year at a minimum. And I think adding this on the ballot this year might very well be a death knell.
I agree with you, Ed.
I agree,
just think it's the wrong year. Even if you say that, you know, goes into the next term. I just think that, you know, the little village of Norwalk with the villagers, when they see an increase and they aren't happy about what's going on, or just one thing is making them upset, it crashes and burns.
yeah,
Yeah.
It's
absolutely.
the history.
Well, and I can tell you, if I was
This
running
may
for
not be the
council, I
year,
would be
John.
saying that I'm not gonna vote for an increase.
Yeah.
Well, that's true too, Carl. You could use that approach, right?
Yeah,
So we done come full circle and we're not going to address compensation? And that's a fair, and let me tell you, that's why you debate. That's why you discuss.
Yeah.
And that's a fair, as I said at the beginning, you may take some things off the list and
Either
Is
that
that-
or John's idea of taking it out of the charter and having, you know, having the state take care of it.
but
That
your
might be something to
cautionary
look at.
note is
Absolutely.
that if we did that, the council could end up getting nothing.
Right,
exactly.
but you know, $60 a month and zero, and they're not very far off.
I was gonna say, I think we're so close to zero already that it's probably worth it.
$47.16. Okay, let's leave it alone.
They didn't get a $10 raise, Ed. It's $50 a month, not 60. So
That's
Oh, okay,
right.
all right.
Right, so,
sorry.
well,
for the
I
year.
think so. I think on
That's
the
right.
compensation issue, we will leave that alone for the moment. I
Okay,
think that's kind of where the consensus is, and I'm inclined to agree. Given the environment, I think to tell people you're going to now pay your council person more money is going to be a challenge. And that was, I mean, to the extent that there's anything to be gleaned from the last time around with this, I think, you know, Carl and Rick, we kind of realized things that were just not going to fly.
and we left it off.
Oh, yeah.
And we put it off, but you know, there's some of those. I mean, I think we need to talk about the 4-year council term, right? I mean, I think that's something that shouldn't be as complicated or controversial, but it's something we can talk about tonight. But that's something last time that we said, let's leave that alone, get the bulk of the stuff through, and then we can revisit it another year. And here we are in another year. So,
But Tyler, let's not lose sight of the fact that if we take it out of the charter, as John suggested,
yeah.
they can get increases next year. If we don't take it out, if the state legislature allows us to do that, if we keep it in the charter, then I think we're stuck to that $600, right?
Yeah, which it's been for 40 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
For 50
Yeah,
years.
so I think taking it
Mayor
out
Collins.
might very well be the best solution in light of the fact that people are looking at pretty
Yes,
significant
I'm
taxes.
sorry. Yeah, I think that is the right idea. I'm sorry. I meant to suggest we don't do an increase. We're not proposing an increase, but I have no issue with removing it. I mean, I think we're close. $60 is close enough to $0.
50. It's 50, not 60. You
50,
already
that's
gave them a
50.
20%
50.
raise, but 50 to 60.
Right. So I'm fine with that.
Well, can we just tie it to the increase for the commissioner's salary? I guess not. Okay.
But that'll be for another commission. So then, I mean, do we, Tanya? Sorry.
Sorry, just a quick question, but I thought Steve wasn't sure if they would even bring it up at this point now. So it could go down to zero and they get nothing for a while. So like,
Compared to,
it's got to be a calculated risk. So it's either we remove it and hope for the best, or you leave it in, but then if nothing changes, then they're stuck at $50 a month, you know, for time immemorial until it maybe changes down the road. I think it's so negligible now. And I've spoken with friends who've served on the council who said that the $50 is just, it's not anything that helps in any real way, right? So I think we're better eliminating it and hoping that we have the ability to change it down the road, rather than be hamstrung at the 600.
Who's going to explain that to the council people?
That's also what I'm saying. Like if they're saying like we deserve more, we want more, and we just pull it out and they get nothing.
Steve,
Let me,
Oh wait, sorry, Steve's talking. Go ahead, Steve.
no, Madam Commissioner, you speak. I just want to let people know that I want to say something when you're done.
No, I probably would it'd be beneficial to hear your explanation because
All right, well, I'm not trying
No,
to.
we like
engage you
yours.
today. Here's what I was going to say, in light of where we seem to be going. And I was going to say, and you were hearing me, Commissioner, before I said it, and that is what we do goes to the council. And when you think about the timing of all this, if we were to address it as follows, and I was going to come up with a solution, if you're going to take it out and you're not going to address compensation, you're going to take the 600 out, I would put a provision in, this is going to be an inelegant way of saying it, but I'll clean it up before we approve it, is compensation shall be set by budget in accordance with law, period. And so the 600's out. The gamble is that they're going to lose it. But when we send it to the council in May, we will probably know where the law is in Hartford. They could make a calculation that it's worth the risk. In fact, we can run in November and say, we're eliminating this and we're going to deal with it in budget where we're accountable to you every year. We're eliminating this salary. We're going to, et cetera, and go forward with it at some risk. But again, it's not an amount of money that's going to kick you into a tax bracket where you'll get the benefit of the Trump tax cuts.
Yeah.
So it's so it's not much.
Nice,
not much
Stephen.
not much to worry about in that regard. And the council then can send it back to us and say, are you kidding me? Or, hey, here's a more elegant solution. But I think that it gets you to a point where you're saying it's an issue that needs to be addressed. We don't want to have your hands tied if the law changes, and you could deal with this in the budget process going forward. And this is the cleaner way to deal. Because right now I was going to say, you got to get rid of this language that locks in the referendum process that's in the current law. And that's why I say by law. So if it is law, then you have to go referendum. If it's not in the law, then you can just do it by budget. So that's what I was going to say. And I think the commissioner was working out the right thing.
Stephen, I have a quick question, Stephen. I'm sorry, John. A quick question. Is there anything that this commission is currently needing or in the future going to need council's approval on?
This charter.
Yes, I understand that. That's what I'm talking about.
All of your work.
But that's what I'm saying. Any particular portion that we really, really want that council will put the kibosh on? Because I just don't, I mean, positioning is everything, right? So.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to say is the council is going to hear what you're doing tonight. Right. And if they really have a real problem with it, I'm sure Tyler will get some calls in the morning or 2 days from now, or we'll hear from them by email. As I said earlier, I don't think there was a huge resounding battle to increase their compensation from what I called during their hearings on the issue. But we're doing it early enough so that you can gauge the sentiment. Knowing the members of this council, and I don't know them as well as you do, but I've gotten to know them over the last 3 years. I don't think they're going to hold a grudge. They may say, can you think about taking it a different way?
The intent is to improve the $600 per year. I mean, right? I mean, I think the consensus seems to be that that's inadequate. So we're attempting to fix that.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
Yes, and also they have to, as it is now, we have to have a referendum for them to get a pay increase, which we all know gets shot down if it's
it's never going to happen.
It's a line.
Not going to happen.
That's why John Levin has to win in Hartford. We got John. That's all.
Yeah, good luck, John.
That's not likely. But
Yeah,
He has a lobbyist.
I would point out that even if it is in the budget, is part of the budget process, if the state law doesn't change, an increase provided through the budgetary process would still have to be approved by a referendum. So if the law doesn't change, so
Yeah.
you know, they can still pick whatever compensation it is. The question, the state law changes just simply to remove the referendum requirement. Also, I do want to mention two things. I feel like with respect to council compensation, there is a problem in Norwalk. Right now, we have a highly self-selected group of council people, actually probably going back 50 years, or no, forever. They're people that will take the job and accept this compensation and are not, have sufficient personal means, and are able to devote the time and things like that. Recall from our meeting 2 weeks ago, Dominique Baez, the council president in Hamden, said that their compensation at, I think it was $4,200 a year, was very, very low. And she felt that it being so low that they were not able to attract more candidates to take on the work because the work is a lot and the compensation is little. That's one point. And the other is, I do want to mention that Jean Nocera from Middletown, who is the council president there, said they just raised their compensation. They don't have a referendum. Steve,
That's illegal, though.
But no, it's not. Careful.
It is illegal. It's contrary to law.
No, it's not illegal. It is not illegal.
It's
Okay.
not?
John, I think that was kind of a separate discussion. That's not something we're on. That's not on the table. We're going to move on from that.
Agreed. Anyway, it's interesting how Middletown solved their problem. I'm not suggesting that's how we should be solving it. I think we have very good options on the table.
We have some good options on the table outside of that.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
are you ready to entertain a motion, Chairman Fairbairn?
So to be clear, we're on the same page. The motion would be to remove the existing language from 4.7. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
4.7C.
4.7C.
Correct.
Sorry, I'm just looking at
I
it real
did
quick.
like the language that Steve, I don't remember what he said verbatim.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that remove the language, but subject to, that it would be subject to budget as provided by law in accordance with law or something like that.
Yeah.
Just so the council doesn't feel like you're just saying, okay, well, you don't need any money. And like,
I would prefer, before we do this, I prefer to have some language written that I can see it, and then I'd be happier to vote on that.
You're just giving me direction to draft
Yes.
something.
Yes,
Before you
I would
approve it,
prefer if
you'll
Mr. Mendick does, draft something.
We'll make a motion to have Steve write replacement language for 4.7C.
That's good.
And Steve, with you, my suggestion would be, if you leave the $600, but then you add language, that allows for an increase should the state permit you to increase or to decrease.
Well, I thought that's what we talked about before. Is that what, does everybody want to leave the 600 as a baseline?
I mean, can you do that?
Any
and
other
still-
compensation?
Can you do that and still increase should the state law permit it?
You can do $600 plus any additional compensation as may be permitted under budget by law or something like that. So you can leave the baseline. That was one of the alternatives we looked at earlier. I thought we moved from that, but that can absolutely be done.
Because doesn't that solve the problem of the council not, thinking that we're taking their money away or something, or that we
I think it does. I think you're right.
But does that need to go to referendum then?
No, because it's in the budget. We're not increasing it. Well, it's going to referendum if the charter revision.
Because the
even
charter is a
sentence-
referendum.
the sentence
Not as a
revision
separate, not
is
as
going-
necessarily as a separate.
No, because we're not changing the baseline, and
Okay.
Lord, if people are going to oppose it because there's a possibility that they could raise it by budget, we're in big trouble.
Right.
Because it's the same dollar amount, so,
Okay.
but it goes to, it's going to be in the charter referendum, so it doesn't have to do anything more. And we're not doing a COLA, it's just what they've got plus anything else. If the law changes, they could do it by budget. If the law doesn't change it, they do it by referendum.
They
So
can
it's
still do
just-
it by budget, but a referendum is required.
Well, it has to go to budget either way, but if the law changes, it ends at the budget. If the law doesn't change, it goes to referendum.
Yeah, understood.
All right, so do we have a motion to ask to have Steve rewrite 47C?
I'll make a motion.
Carl. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, so that's unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay, so trying to think what makes the most sense. What makes the most sense? I mean, I guess the other larger discussion we're going to have is going to be around minority party representation. We'd heard from a number of people about that. I've been thinking about it myself and trying to think of a way that it makes sense. Obviously, we don't have anything right now, and my concern has been, if you do it, there's kind of two ways you can go with minority party representation, right? One way, which was what I believe Waterbury does, which is you have 15 seats, 10 are the majority, 5 are the minority representation, and then in order to pass anything, you have to get one of the 5. Sorry, Steve, did I misrepresent that?
That was Waterbury system. Waterbury moved to a mini at-large. They now have 15, 5 districts with 3 members each, 2 and 1. A cap of 2 on majority.
Cap of 2 and
1. So
1.
you end up in the same place, but you're doing it on a neighborhood basis or a district basis.
Right. So that is one way to do it and have it actually be impactful, because you can't pass anything unless you get one of the 5. The other way to do it would just be to set an arbitrary number that has no real impact, right? I mean, we have one non-Democrat on there now, and I mean, you could make it 2, you could make it 3 or 4, but I mean, other than having, you have voices at the table, but what is it really doing? Other than having voices at the table, and then you would have to, I mean, either way you do it, you're probably going to have to change how we have things now, unless you're just going to say, pick a number of the at-large that you're going to say now have to be minority party. So I'm curious to hear people's thoughts as to how to approach minority party representation if it's something we want to change in the charter.
So just so I'm clear, so you're saying that if I'm council at large, I could be removed from my seat because you need to fill a minority representation?
That's how it would have to work. I mean, you could do what Waterbury does, and we would have to, if we did what Waterbury does, you would eliminate at large. You'd have 3 representatives from each district, and one of each of those 3 in each of the 5 districts would be minority party representation.
Yeah, I can't imagine we wouldn't be challenged or the city challenged if we did something that a at-large person or anybody that was elected by their constituents was then told, you got to go bye-bye because we got to meet a minority election thing here.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's.
Well,
that
that's not
makes
what
sense.
Waterbury does, right? Waterbury.
No, it's not what anybody, that's virtually what nobody does. Ed's point is politically they do it, but from an election perspective, you cap the number of people that the party can nominate. So no one tells a winner to go away.
So
But
no one current in a current office would lose their seat.
They wouldn't lose their seat.
No, everything is prospective, Carl.
Okay,
so
I
you're
got
not-
you. Future
You can't
stuff.
eliminate somebody's, if you make you can't do a 4-year term for the mayor in the middle of a 2-year term for mayor.
Correct.
The mayor has to run for the 4-year term.
Correct.
Same thing is true when for an NPR, you would fix it in the next cycle.
But it could come into
Or 2
play.
cycles.
It could come into play in next cycle after the election is over and votes are counted.
Well, it would. So this is what
Only if
Hampton
it-
does,
only if
Carl.
it
So
was in effect. Yeah.
if you had say it was changed, so you still have 15 people, but it's all districts, right? So you have the 5 districts, you have 3 seats per district.
Right.
Going into it, each part, you would say Democrats, you get 2 spots, figure out who those 2 are and put them on the ballot, and then Republicans or Working Family or Independents over as you guys get the 1 spot and you figure out who it is. So it's not, you don't have 6 people putting their hat in the ring and then you're cutting out somebody who would have otherwise won. It's just the number of hats in the ring or the number of seats that are available.
It would work is if you have a 3-person district, every voter would get to vote for 3 people, but every party can only nominate the max that they could have, which is 2. So the Dems would nominate 2, the Republicans would nominate 2, the working families would nominate 2, the conservatives would nominate 2, and if you end up with a split district with 1-1-1, you end up with a 1-1-1. No one gets the majority, but you want to make sure that no one can go beyond 2. So that's why each party would be capped at 2 members, so they can never elect 3.
My feeling about this is that this is an example of bad facts make bad policy. And in 2014, the city council was 8-7 Democrat, Republican, and 1 Democrat caucused with the Republicans. So it was really 8-7, and Republicans were in control of the chamber. Fast forward to 2016, and on the national level, we have a shift in the Republican Party, and everyone else sort of follows suit. And ever since that time, there's been a supermajority of Democrats on the city council and a supermajority, in fact, a unanimous majority on the Board of Ed eventually. And so what we're really talking about right now is changing something now on a structural level that really wasn't necessary when we had 2 parties that were prepared, that were willing to govern. And so I think that to codify our existing factual scenario, which is we have a party on the national level that, for better or for worse, is affecting voters on a local level. We have a party on the national level that is sort of out of touch, not with the center of the country, but with the East Coast, with Connecticut, with Massachusetts, with New York, with California, with the coastal part of the country. We're asking we're suggesting codifying a change in this part of the country that is at odds with the national political situation to mirror that situation. And I think that that is really not necessary in a city like Norwalk. In a city, in a Norwalk, it's the unaffiliated that really make the difference in every election. And we do have a party registration of twice as many Democrats as Republican, but the unaffiliated are as numerous as the Democrats are in this city. And they, more often than not, shift the election one way or the other. The problem is that since 2016, that they have shifted, the unaffiliated have shifted toward the Democratic side. And even with that, the elections are usually 54% to 46%. So they're still pretty close, even when you have the unaffiliated shift the election toward the Democrats. So we're talking about codifying something that to freeze in time a factual scenario that may not exist in 4 years, meaning that the Republican Party might very well return to a governing party, like a party that wants to do something rather than, tear something down. And so I'm totally against minority party representation because this is a snapshot in time. And just before the 2016 election, we had a city that was very evenly divided and a city council that was very evenly divided, so much so that even though we had an 8-7 majority, the Democrats had an 8-7 majority on the city council, it was still a Republican city council. So I think this is sort of a folly. It's anti-democratic. It is not reflective of how the people of Connecticut in general, and certainly of Norwalk, feel at present about which party is the party that they want to govern. And so I'm against this.
I would agree with everything Ed said, and the thing that I keep having in the pit of my stomach that comes back is when I hear this kind of talk, and from our guests that we had and this sort of thing, is that to me, if you as a party member feel that your party is not being able to compete, that you have Jerry Jones own your party, that you make a change so that you're more competitive and so you can compete on the same level as the other party, the mainstay party, whatever you want to call it, without making it more complicated or helping somebody that is not as strong as the party that's in power, whichever way, whether it's Republican or Democrat. Because I think your points, Ed, were very good about how the sand shifted from the dates that you mentioned. I mean, there was a time, what, in the late 80s, mid to late 80s to 90s, where the Republicans ruled everything down just like the Democrats did. Now, and so I, for my 2 cents, I would be on Ed's side and vote that I'm not in favor of this at all.
John, you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Thank you, Ed.
I have put a lot of thought into this, as some of you may know, if you read the memo that Tyler forwarded to every commission member last Thursday. I think we are trying to solve a problem, and there's more than one way to solve the problem. And I think that I tried to identify what that problem was with reference to the last couple of municipal elections. So just looking at the last municipal election, which actually I participated in and lost, the Democratic candidates received, this is for at-large council members. Actually, let me ask, has everyone seen the memo that I sent last week and had a chance to read, like item 2, which discusses this specifically, minority party?
I saw it,
seeing two hands.
but I think I need your explanation though. It was
I'm curious to hear more about it, John. I've
It was
reviewed
so
it.
well written. It should require no explanation.
Well,
but
then
nonetheless,
explain it
I'm
to
here
us like
explain.
like we were Labrador retrievers, because it seemed pretty complicated to me.
Okay, it's not, but in any case, looking at the last at-large election, there were five candidates from each party, Republican and Democrat, running for the 5 at-large seats. The voters voted in whatever way they did, and the Democratic candidates received 55% of all votes. The Republican candidates received 40% of all votes. Okay, so clearly there were more votes cast for Democratic candidates, but the way this election was structured is 100% of the seats were awarded to the Democratic candidates. Not because they won 100% of the votes, they won 55% of the total votes, but because their 5 candidates exceeded the vote totals for the 5 competing candidates that were not Democrats. Okay, so
John, that makes my point that there's more registered voters in one party than there is in the other.
no, it doesn't. It's not the subject of specifically of registration. Anyone can vote for a Republican candidate. Anyone can vote for a
Yeah,
Democratic
but
candidate.
then it ties back into voter turnout. It turns into how many soldiers you got going to war. Yeah.
Right. So maybe, but the point that I'm trying to make is that the Democrats won 55% of the total votes, yet were awarded 55% of the at-large. 100% were awarded 100% of the at-large seats. That is anti-democratic in my view. And the same election pattern is repeated in prior years. There are fixes to this. Okay, and one is minority party representation. And I think, quite frankly, I agree with Ed's critique of minority party representation. And also at the meeting we had 2 weeks ago, Dominique Baez of the Hampton City Council made it very, very clear. The problem is that it's disrespect, in my view and hers, it disrespects the voters by not allowing the highest vote getters to obtain the seat. Okay, so people have dealt with this type of problem before. It's a disenfranchised minority that under a specific system gets no seat at the table, gets 0 seats, even though they have substantial number of voters and a substantial number of votes. And Steve, I don't know if you had a chance to look at this, but the solution that has been examined by quite a few legal scholars and academics is something called cumulative voting, which most people won't be familiar with. But I did provide a description of it in the memo, and I hope you were able to go to the Wikipedia links and see
I'm
where
still waiting for the explanation of what that means.
Oh, so you didn't read the Wikipedia explanation?
No,
Okay,
I haven't read it, no.
Real simple. Under cumulative voting, and it can be structured in different ways. The voters who vote for, let's say, just take Norwalk and the current election structure for at-large council, at-large council members. There's 5 seats available. And instead of being forced to allocate only 1 vote to each candidate, you can take your 5 votes and allocate them in any way among the candidates you wish to. So you could take all 5 of those votes and assign them to a single candidate. You could take 2 votes to one candidate and 3 votes to another, or 2, 2, and 1, or 3, 1, and 1. And you have 5 votes. Every voter has the same voting power, but this disenfranchised minority is not forced to take their votes and divide them into only 1/5 to support a single candidate. It's highly democratic. The principal, one of the most, I think, cogent spokespeople for this method is actually Lonnie Guinier, Harvard Law professor, and she examined many jurisdictions, especially in the South, where there were disenfranchised minorities who were not able to obtain any representation in legislative bodies because they use structures similar to what Norwalk uses currently to elect their at-large people. So there are cities that do this. Peoria, Illinois elects their common council by cumulative voting. And the Amarillo, Texas School Board, it's not common. And to the best of my knowledge, it's not used anywhere in Connecticut. I asked our Secretary of the State if this is permissible. She was unfamiliar with it.
Is it permissible?
It's
Is it
not
worth debating if it's not permissible?
It's not permissible.
It's not.
Yeah, and they're looking at ranked choice voting right now. They may be looking at cumulative as well. It's not, there's no statutory authority for us to utilize cumulative voting at the local
Correct.
level. It's an interesting idea. I was counsel to an organization in Washington. We use cumulative voting. It's a wonderful concept, but it's not, there's no express grant of authority to allow municipalities to use it in Connecticut.
Okay, so
and this would not be as simple as your other legislation, John, with all
no, understood.
All right,
But
so
I would like to dwell upon the problem, and this is a potential solution. Steve, I know that you stand very firmly that if there's no express grant of authority by the legislature, then it cannot be done. There are counter arguments that under the Home Rule Act in Connecticut, that if the legislature is silent on a subject, and
No, John, we're gonna defer to Steve here.
Which is why towns like Bristol will have a referendum on term limits, and based on the selection
Bristol
of their
is
voters.
ultra-virus, John. That is not an alternate home rule argument. With all due respect, home rule is express grants of authority, not silence. People who have defied home rule have gone on silence, and I assure you, at some point, somebody challenges Bristol, it will be knocked down because it's not consistent with. There's no legal basis for that provision. It's a logical argument, but it's not the law in Connecticut.
Possibly. It's been, Bristol voted it in 2013. And it's been in the charter of Bristol for.
Yeah, and I recommended they take it out. And when the people vote and the commission voted to take it out, they were all thrown out of office. Yes, you have a popular uprising that is lawless. Ultimately, I stand by the argument that there's no express grant of authority for what Bristol has in its charter or Wilton has in its charter. And to the contrary, so people have voted for it.
And I think this is something we discussed very early on, that we're not going down this road.
I agree.
Right.
I
We're
agree.
gonna defer to Steve. We're not gonna do something and hope that no one notices or challenges it. I appreciate the thought behind it, but we're not gonna do that. So
Yeah, this isn't transparent at all.
yeah, I do
Is
want to
it
recognize Doug. His hand has been up for a bit.
Transparent. Anyway,
Thank you.
John, I'm recognizing
I would
Doug.
say for the problem that we have in Norwalk.
Hang on, John. I've
John.
been recognized, John. For
John,
all
you gotta hang
protocol, John, I've been recognized.
Okay.
You had your turn.
Yeah.
So I'm going to counter a little what Ed brought up, and it's never come up in the past. But you're looking at somebody who, when he jumped back into politics with Mr. McQuaid, he and I were the only two Republicans elected from two different districts when Mr. Knopp was the mayor. The prior year to Knopp, which was 2001, if I remember correctly, because you and I went in 2003, it was 15-0 on the council and 9-0 on the Board of Education. So it had nothing to do with 2016. It's happened in the past and that was based around revow more than anything. So there was only two members of us at that time. I think the next time around we picked up a couple more. If I remember correctly, we did win the mayor, but we only had 4 seats on the council. So you're right, Norwalk's a mixed bag. But there's, except for I think now just 2 towns, I think one of the town adopted it. There was only 3 communities, and Norwalk's one of them, that did not have a minority representation clause anywhere in its charter. So we're the outliers by a big margin in the state of Connecticut. So having learned about some of this, because I didn't even know it existed because it was never brought up before, and having sat there by myself and somebody else behind me sitting by himself, now Heather Dunn is sitting by himself, you really don't have a voice. I fortunately got one because I just was around long enough that I knew where enough bodies were buried that I was relied on to be the library. But
And Alex didn't like us.
oh yeah, well that's all of them. So what I think we're missing here is 2 things. A, just from a point, guess who makes the rules about what party's a majority party and what's a minority party? Are the 2 majority parties, the Republican and Democrat Party, and they set down the rules that if you want to be a minor party, you have to do X, Y, and Z. You have to petition for the spot. You got to maintain a certain percentage of votes on your spot. The big parties made the rules. So the biggest group that's disenfranchised in my book is the unaffiliated voter, because they're the majority. And they really don't have any representation because they didn't form a party. So having tried to dig in this a little and change some of my inner feelings over the years, just like you said, Ed, hey, those are the rules. You win, you lose, you lose. The unaffiliated voter has gotten bigger in political parties, both sides, even though they've gotten bigger, have gotten smaller. So there may have come a time of day that we've got to consider this, especially the other communities seem to do that. I just want to make sure, as John spoke before, that we got to make sure if we do something like this, we can make sure that it happens by the spirit of the law and not being able to circumvent it. I think it has its place nowadays. That it's not in 2016. Because we were diminished as a council representatives on the Board of Ed during the term when you're right. The first year Harry got elected, we had a majority on the council because of Bruce Kimmel. And after that, it changed once before because some people deserted the caucus. All right. But I get it. So, I think there's a time and place for it. And I just happen to think, I'm trying to look at it. I'm trying to look at it objectively and not as a Republican that is kind of shut out because, that there must be a place for it, but it's got to be done in the correct manner that, again, remains in the spirit of the law. I don't think, and I'm just saying in past history, and McQuaid, you tell me if I'm wrong, because you're my other person on this, the Board of Education prior to the changes in the 94 5, I think it was, when we changed to the present
Right.
system.
To 4-5.
Basically, there was 4 seats at large 1 year and 3 seats at large the 2 years over.
Right,
2 candidates ran from each party each time.
right.
So the year that 4 candidates ran, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats to get on. The only way the Board of Ed would change was the year they each ran 2, and only 3 got elected.
Right.
So some format of that existed once in Norwalk. If you
Yeah, but
really
that
want
was
to-
unofficial though. That was basically the parties got together, the Democrat and the Republican Party got together, and they decided to basically pull one over the vote, pull the wool over the voters' eyes and do that. But that was not by ordinance or by statute or by charter. Moreover, in those years that Alex Knopp was the mayor, there were 4 years. That was in the 24 years with Alex not being in the middle of those 4 years, we had Republican mayors. We had Esposito for 12. We had Knopp for 8. We had Knopp for 4, and then we had Moshe for 8. So in that very period of time that you're talking about, it was still a Republican. We still have Republican mayors. In other words, Republicans were competitive. They were able to compete in the city because the unaffiliated voters thought that they were the rational choice. Now, there is a time for everything. I don't think now is the time because I think we still have those bad facts. My question, the last meeting was with Greenwich, Darien, and Westport. Do they have minority party representation? Because I suspect that they have whatever those things are called. Those, and it's not a city council.
RTMs.
Yeah,
RTMs?
the RPMs. Do they have minority party representation?
Yes.
Yes.
And what's the breakdown there?
Yeah.
I have a chart here and it was, I will have to follow up on Greenwich, and Westport. I don't have because it's too small, didn't fit into it wasn't part of the top 20 communities. What was the third one on your list?
Greenwich, Westport, and Darien.
Yeah, Darien. I don't have Darien. It was too far down on the list, population wise. I'll get that data for you.
I know Greenwich has Greenwich has a 3-person board of selectmen that only 2 can be from one party. So you have one
person.
They have 3 people on the board of selectmen. You have first selectman, and then the other 2 are kind of fill out the board. The top 2 vote getters, the from each party. You have a 230 person RTM broken out over 12 districts. I don't believe there's NPR on the RTM.
I don't think so either.
The BET is split, and then the Board of Ed is split.
Fairfield is also a community in the top 10 communities or 11 communities in the state. They have 40 members on their RTM, and they do have NPR on their, and it's a district system. So they elect several. They elect several members from each district. I think 4 from each district. There's 10 districts. They've got the 40 members, so they have NPR. The only most of the communities that have at large do have NPR. I'll check Westport and Darien for you, and I'll check the Greenwich RTM as well. I could not find it in their charter. Was really indecipherable when I was going through to try. It's one of the reasons I didn't hand this out, because I could not finish the Greenwich analysis, but I'll get you Westport and Darien. I can say that of the communities, of the top 30 communities, 25 have NPR, 5 do not. 4 of the 5 are districts, so you don't need NPR in a district system. And the only community that does not have NPR in the at-large hybrid system we have is Norwalk. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's currently the way it's set up, and that's general direction. If you go through a pure district system, there's no NPR, and so if you were to expand, keep the council at the same size and have 15 districts, individual districts, as opposed to what you have right now, it would increase your districts by 3, right? It would triple the number of districts, smaller districts, and it might allow for alternate parties to have a shot at winning a district election. It's kind of an alternate way to minority party representation, is to make the districts more accessible and more competitive in that regard. But
Smaller number
I
of
just wanted
doors to
to-
knock. Yeah.
and
Tanya,
to-
I want to, sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
took your hand, bud.
No, no worries. No, I was just thinking that the unaffiliated party is growing each year. And so while I understand everyone having a voice, just because there's Democrats and Republicans, a lot of people, and I know a lot of people my age group, the millennials, a lot of us are unaffiliated because there's a lot of things we don't like about either party.
Bingo.
So you kind of just go with who makes the most sense at the time. So now I think, and also the way the political system in our country is going, people are just looking at what is going to be beneficial for me now. They're not looking at, we want the Republicans in charge, the Democrats. It's who right now makes the most sense for me and my family. So I'm not sure if during this political climate that we're in, if NPR is going to make much of a big difference just because of the climate we're in now. That was just my 2 cents.
I would
No,
agree with you.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. And I mean, to me, it seems as though a growing share of unaffiliateds is an argument against it, right? So, I mean, you have your parties, but they're going to be decided by which way those people break, which then comes down to candidate quality.
Which is the way it really should be.
Well,
Yeah.
I would say that's not true about candidate quality, because it cuts
You have a
two ways.
registration advantage for sure.
It cuts 2 ways, You have
Yeah.
people who can't even finish a term they started, So I'm just, this was brought up, so I'm not fighting it because of the way things have gone. Like I said, I've sat on both. I've
Yeah.
sat on councils where it's 15-2 a coalition of cross-endorsed cancer Republicans with only 2 Democrats on. I've been to that dance, but we caucus as independents by ourselves. Republicans caucused, all right, and the 2 Democrats. We kind of work together, and I've also been in where the council is split 3 ways, evenly, 5, 5, and 5. So I'm just seeing long-term any one party, be it Republican or Democrat, because it happened in Long Island where Republicans were in power so long, and people take advantage of things like that. I think it's too extreme the way that they did it. And was it Hamden? You said has
The Waterbury with the 10 and 5.
Waterbury with the 1. That's an extreme where you got to have, it's kind of like the dumb rules the Senate has. Majority doesn't rules in the Senate. It takes 60 votes on some things. Well, I always thought that was dumb both ways, but I think that's too much of extreme. But I think having voices, and that's what I'm talking about, the the democracy part, rather than having 3 minutes to say what you need to say before a meeting, you can have a seat at the table and at least voice your concerns, whether it be a Republican, Democrat, independent, or even an unaffiliated voter running and petitioning their way onto a thing. It's something that I've got more of a revelation of myself personally over the last year. So I'm just trying to share that.
The dirty little secret is that most people are thrown in one direction or another. No one is truly down the middle. We have a worldview or a sense of fairness, a sense of right, a sense of wrong. Most people are not born Republicans or Democrats, but they are born and eventually become thrown in one direction or another, either left or right, or even those in the center are still, thrown toward one side or the other. So, the city council last year passed a budget 8-7. It was it was a 14-1, a city council, and they passed a budget 8-7. So, I think most people are truly independent and they vote that way. But I think that to talk about party representation, I think that to Ms. Rhodes' point, people vote, like the unaffiliated party really makes the difference in these elections year in, year out. And I think that no one really knows what the independent party stands for or what this candidate stands for. No one does that level of homework. People vote for the party that they think best represents them. And, you know, I think it was Will Rogers who said that, I'm not a member of an organized party, I'm a Democrat. I think that was shown in the election, in the budget vote a couple of years ago. I think this is kind of sort of a red herring to talk about parties. People, even within a party, we have our Carl who agrees, I think, with me about this whole issue. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat. No one really, parties, it's sort of a misnomer. And as long as we have a robust, unaffiliated party in this city, I think all of this is really not necessary. And we certainly don't want to codify something that is not because at the moment it's a 14-1 city council and 9-0 board of ed. That was not the case 10 years ago. And in the years that you were referring to, Doug, there were 20 years of a Republican mayor and only 4 years of a Democratic mayor in a city that was largely Democratic because of the unaffiliated vote.
Jim, you've had your hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering how when we start to discuss in more detail the size of our common council and how much bigger we think it should be, if we think that's what it should be, how that will kind of affect our discussion now. Because if we have more seats available, then there's more possibility for different viewpoints and different people of different parties in that council. So I think they're kind of tied in some fashion.
Yeah, I think it's a parallel discussion.
And
right?
so I think that I almost feel like I want to come back to this discussion once we've really talked about the size of our common council, the size that we need for our city of a common council to govern. And then I think, because I haven't thought a whole lot about the whole minority representation, so forgive me for not having done like much research that way. But I do think that if we have more people on the council, and we do think that that's an important thing for our city, then that will have an impact on there are more seats at the table, so more people have the opportunity to sit at the table. So that's my basic point.
That's a good point.
Very good point, Jim. Joe?
Hey there. So to piggyback on what Tim said about the size of the council, I'd just like to speak to the composition of the council. Just having 5 at-large members, we sometimes wind up with certain districts having more of a voice, more representation than others. So I would just like to add that to the conversation.
Does anybody know how many people each council member represents?
The at-large?
No, altogether. So you got 15 council people, 5 at large, right?
Oh, good
So
question.
out of 20 people elected to represent citizens of this town, how
Yes,
many people do each one represent?
Is that 90,000 divided by 15? Is that what it is?
What's
it's
the
gonna
real
be just-
population?
it's gonna be
90,000 or
redistricted.
100,000?
It would be the 9, you'd have to use the 9. I can get the data, we just did redistricting, so.
Why does it matter?
Well, I think it does matter.
Why?
Well, because I think that if you've got a person that represents, it used to be that a congressman, I think, represented, what was it, 250, 300,000 people. Now they represent 700,000 people.
Right.
That's a big difference. And I'm not saying we're that kind of a scale, but I think that there's more intimacy and more connection with your people that you represent, the smaller it is, or the more people you have elected to interact with them.
Hmm. Doug? You're on mute,
You're
Doug.
on mute.
You're on mute, Doug.
I asked that question if we couldn't put that together. I did some quick research because I asked that about whether or not we should increase the size of the council, because somebody brought it up. And I asked if we could get the population and find out when the last time Norwalk upped its council members. They did at one point, I think it used to be 13 and went to 15, but that, I think it's somewhere in the 40s or whatever. In the 70s, pretty much, I'm sorry, in the 80s, the population of Norwalk was about 72,000, 70,000, waned a couple times, so it actually went down one year. And we had 15 council people. Now we're about 94, so I think it's 93 and change, if I got it right. All right, so we've gone almost 20 some odd thousand people and have an increased representation per person. Now, if we go back to the 50s, I mean, there used to be like 55,000 people in the mid 50s in Norwalk. All right, so, and there were, I think at that time, still 15. So we haven't kept the proper percentage, if you look at it long term, with the amount of council people, if whatever magic number was picked way back when to be the amount of council people. So it does deserve a lookout, and it probably would solve some of the other issues we're talking about, minority representation. I think 40 people like Stanford might be a bit overwhelming, but
Yeah.
it's a question of trying to see, and do, putting more district even gets to be an interesting concept over versus citywide. So, but
Well-
certainly I'd like to see a population, find out when we change the numbers and what the population is at the time we change the numbers, and then what the population has been every decade or something in the census, just to get a feel of how much we've, left people with only the same amount of voices they had when there was half as many people in Norwalk.
We also need to take into account that back then there was only a telephone, probably. There was no emails or any other way to communicate with your constituent or with your representative. So
There were 3 newspapers and 4 reporters.
There you
back
go.
then.
Mhm.
yeah,
That's a big difference. Sometimes we had reporters at every committee meeting. So, you don't have, that they never show up at any committee meeting unless it's some huge thing. So the press
Right.
was a lot more relevant.
So, I mean, here's what I would recommend then, because it's almost 9 o'clock. We haven't touched the minutes yet, which we were going to try to approve this meeting. I've been dreading this moment, but what I would say is, maybe let's, to the extent we're going to look into, some additional information that'll inform this discussion. We can set up next time to discuss council size as related to NPR. We'll continue that, and then the other, I think, notable thing that has come up a number of times, I think we were going to discuss, was the potential for a 4-year term for council members. So we have those, Steve, and I believe we had kind of kept the structure for the next meeting so that if this conversation spilled over, we could accommodate it.
Yeah, the next meeting, what we had was kind of a light meeting on new topics. We had the 4-year term, and we had the role of sheriff, the 4-year versus 2-year, and the
Yep.
role of sheriffs and constables. So these are not, I don't think I need to have a panel discussion for that. I think
No.
we can continue this dialogue and move into that.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, we also had council vacancies. Do we want to make sure that that's on the list?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. That was that's certainly one that I'm interested in sorting out after this summer.
I have a question for Steve, if I may.
Please, Jim.
And I'm wondering, is there, to your knowledge, are there any charters that talk about common council size and being tied to the population of the city?
No,
Okay.
not that I'm aware of. I mean, there's no correspondence in there.
Because when Doug made his point.
Because in Hartford,
Yeah.
which is one of the largest cities in the state, you have a 9-member body. Stanford, which is just a little larger, is 40 members. New Haven, a little smaller, 30 members. Bridgeport, 20 members. So it's basically local preference. It might be local tradition. And I think that Doug's, the vice chair's comments are quite interesting. I will take a look at redistricting and see what kind of data is there. I think going back, and I'll talk to City Hall to see if they have any historic data, going into the archives to try to figure out when the council shifted size versus population might be really difficult, Doug, but I'll see what I could find out on that.
I'll go down to the sewage treatment plant and see if that plaque is still on the wall in one of the original buildings, because that's what I noticed one time when I went in there. It was like, wait a minute, there's only 13 people here. So, you know, I know at some point, so, you know, maybe I can figure it out that
Most
way.
of the time, I mean, my experience with most of the towns is they tend to stay relatively where they are. New Haven, I think at one point went up to 33 aldermen in the 1950s or 60s, and then they came back down to 30. And you know, you have to go back to the 19th century to see what their board of selectmen looked like. Bridgeport, most of the cities have been the same size for years. Now, Hartford was 9 because in the 1940s, Hartford was a council manager form of government. And the councils in council manager forms of government tend to be smaller, more like a board of directors. But when they came out of it, they didn't increase. They just stayed at the 9. But that's the reason Hartford is smaller, I think, than the other big cities. And I know you want to do your minutes.
Yeah, we'll plan to carry those discussions over, Steve. I'll check back in with you, and I'll speak with Esther and make sure we have those on the agenda. But I think that'd be good to carry that conversation over, and I think it was absolutely helpful to get the ball rolling on that tonight. So moving on, I believe we're at the minutes. Are we not? Just double check the agenda. Acceptance of minutes. So this is the last thing before we adjourn.
What about old business?
We don't have any old business.
That's right. The minutes are the old business.
The minutes are the way old business. They go back to 2024. So we have.
Not that I want to leave, but do you need me for the minute discussion?
No, please. That is some billable hours that we can save, Steve. We'll send you on your way. So
I may not be able to retire now. Okay, thank you. See you later. Bye-bye.
Greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Steve.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Steve, before you go, and he left.
Carl, if you had a question for him, feel free to shoot it out in an email or
That was quick.
send it to him. He was on his way. As we have the 12-3, the 12-17, and then our last one, which was the January 7th. Was that the last one? Yeah.
Yes.
I'll move the December 3rd minutes.
Pardon?
I'll move the December 3rd minutes.
Oh, you're gonna go from oldest?
Okay. Do we have I'm sorry, who that was Doug?
That was Doug.
Yeah, right.
Made a motion to approve the 12-3 minutes. We had some were there were simple corrections to those that we had already discussed, or was that one?
Well, at our last meeting, you had me read the changes into the record, which I actually did, painful as it was. And I then, as we subsequently agreed, circulated them by email, which you have forwarded to every commissioner. But I know that there was a vote taken to approve the minutes with the changes that I had submitted, and then subsequently a vote to actually table approval of the minutes, if I'm getting that right.
So no, so I'm looking at your notes now, right? So the 12-3, the 12-3 minutes, the things that I thought should be corrected, right, that were factually inaccurate, were there was a reference to the approval of the November 19th minutes that was unanimous. We know that that wasn't unanimous because Rick and John abstained. That's a change that should be in there. John, of the stuff you sent, I didn't think anything else warranted a change because it was omissions, and I'm not interested in doing the omissions.
Oh, that's really too bad. I think that omissions, especially if they're material,
they're not.
Should matter. That's your opinion, and we.
So then we will make a motion to. We will make. Everyone has had a chance to review your suggested revisions. If people are confident in voting on the things you felt were omitted and should be included without having gone back and reviewed, and perhaps people have gone back and reviewed the video and can confirm those things, right? So, Joe, I want to call on you before we finish up this part.
I'm sorry. I was just looking at the paragraph 6 about term limits. and not to belabor the point, but the suggestion that John made was really about providing clarity. And I feel like in this first round, this commission, a lot of the work was about providing clarity and definitions and so forth. And I'm not sure that for a layperson, where it says term limits is not in a special acts regimen, that people would understand what that means. So I'm in support of that little bit of clarification about a special act or general act of the legislature.
Where was this,
Okay.
Joe?
Which part is this? Is the part for in 12.3 paragraph 6 replace the part that said he was not proposing eliminating taxing districts?
This is about term limits.
Y-
And I
No.
apologize because I don't
Are you
have,
talking I'm sorry, you in the 12.3 minutes?
I believe it was actually 12:17.
Okay.
All right, so
I'm sorry.
we're
I
on
have my
we're on
term
12.3
limit.
right now. So
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't
so
find
everybody
it.
has had a chance to review John's suggestions. So is there a motion to approve John's revisions to the 12.3 minutes?
I move to remove, accept the corrections to the 12.3 minutes that I submitted and circulated to the commission.
All in favor?
No, no second.
Do we need one?
Don't need
All in
one.
favor of John's revisions? One, so John and Joe, all opposed? Okay, so now we go back to, do we approve the 12.3 minutes? I will make a motion to approve the 12.3 minutes.
No, I did that already.
You already did. I'm sorry. Did we make a motion
Because
to,
you can't have the conversation without that.
I'm sorry. I will make a motion to revise the part that said something passed unanimously when it should have been John and Rick McQuaid abstained.
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor of making that change?
Fine.
Okay. So now Doug has already made the motion to approve the 12.3 minutes. Doug, is that inclusive of that change that we just
Yeah,
approved?
we just
Okay.
voted on the change.
Okay.
so.
So all in favor of approving the 12.3 minutes?
Let me interrupt for 1 second. I know, Joe Bennett previously was
The
mentioned.
motion on the floor, I don't think you can.
Yeah, you can't, I think, John, I don't think we can.
I'd like to just, please grant me the liberty. Joe had mentioned the issue of term limits. One of the corrections that I submitted was for paragraph 7 on page 5 of the 12.3 minutes, remove the sentence that says term limits are off limits. It's unattributed, and it's a non sequitur, and we have never decided as a group that is the case. It has never been brought up for a vote.
So why don't we just add that, according to Steve Mitnick, the term limits are not something that we can
We
do.
can attribute it. I don't think we agreed as a group that was, I think we did agree as a group that was something we're not going to discuss because we can't do it.
No, we
That's
never
right.
actually did have.
We didn't take a vote on it, John, but we had a discussion about it.
So then who decided the consent? How was the consensus decided then?
We voted
So
on
how
it
was the decision?
because we can't do it.
No, we didn't vote on it. Go check the
Why don't we
minutes.
just say that Steve
We can-
indicated that term limits are not something that we can do, and there was, the consensus appears to be that that's not something that we can do.
We had moved on from that topic.
Yeah, but the thing is, why would we vote on something we can't do?
All right.
Term limits can only
So-
be handled at the state level.
You know what? That's the opinion of our expert, who I greatly respect. Other towns have handled it differently.
We've had this discussion.
I know we have. I'm not trying to have this.
Do you want to
discussion.
attribute it?
We,
Do you want to
yeah, we
attribute
can
that?
attribute it to Mr. Mendick.
We will attribute that to,
I just said my proposal was remove the sentence. Term limits are.
well, that got shot down because no, we didn't approve your revisions. We voted on that and it wasn't approved. So we've moved on from that. So are we going to approve the 12.3 minutes with the correction? All in favor? right, that's enough. Okay, so now the motion passes to approve the 12-3 minutes. We now have the 12-17 minutes. Is there a motion to approve the 12-17 minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the 12-17 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Jim. John, I'm looking at the two corrections you had sent on the 12-17 minutes. There was replace Mr. Levin said Ms. Dunn submitted a written statement at the last meeting with Ms. Bennett said. Okay, so that is a factual thing to correct, right? If Joe said something and you did not, that should be reflected in the minutes. Other than that, the other one was an omission, and I don't think it's material in any way.
I think it's very material, and I think it should be included. But if people can disagree,
John, it's an omission. It's something that people can
an
go.
omission can be material.
What is
How
the
is that
omission again?
material?
What is it again?
My
I don't have it in front of me. What's
John
it-
wants to replace Mr. Levin said he strongly disagreed with Mr. Levin replied he strongly disagreed because the current charter mandates that the current charter commission be formed to review the work of the last commission.
Okay, that's not a. I mean, you disagree. That's the bottom line.
You
Right?
disagreed.
Whatever the rationale was, the
Right.
point is,
John, it says you disagreed. If anyone's interested in the disagreement, they will go look at the video. And guess what? No one's doing that.
What is the harm of including the additional detail?
Because it never ends. It never ends if we do the omissions. You have 9 people that are going to suggest things.
No,
It never ends. It's why I'm not interested in doing the omissions. It is not the intent, John. We are moving on with the simple minutes with the time.
You look at the December 17th minutes. I think Telesco clearly upped their game. I don't know what instructions you or Esther gave to them, but they have improved, which is impressive. And
Right, so it's moving in the right direction. And what I've asked them to do moving forward, okay, is to do simple, concise, accurate minutes. And if they are inaccurate, we will correct them like we're doing right now with timestamps. So in the event that a member of the public wants to look at the minutes, they say, okay, John Levin was discussing NPR at 1 hour and 25 minutes in the video. Now they go in there and they can hear word for word your voice without having to do the omissions. We're not doing the omissions, okay? So is there a motion to approve the 12-17 minutes correcting the Mr. Levin said when it was Ms. Bennett said?
Well, can we do other? I have another change.
If there's other factual stuff, yes. If there's factual inaccuracies, we'll fix it.
Yeah, I would just like to state that I was in attendance at that meeting.
That is an important one, Jim.
It's just, I mean, yeah, they attribute a comment to me later, but I'm not shown as being in attendance. So
Okay, so we will update we'll update the misattribution to correctly identify Joe, and we'll make sure it's noted that Jim was there. So is there a motion to approve the 12-17 minutes with those changes?
I so motion.
Okay, all in favor? That was, I'm sorry. Okay, that's enough. All opposed? 1. Any abstentions?
I wasn't there.
1 abstention. Okay.
Same with Mr. Clark, I guess, right? That's
you and Jim and ducked out.
yeah, we went. That's when we went out that night. Remember?
So the January 7th minutes. I don't want to get into it other than John has suggested correcting, changing Levine to Levin. That is an important change. We'll do that throughout the document. There was a correction to referring to our panel as staff and not guests, which I'm in favor, John, of calling them guests. I think that's the appropriate word. They're certainly not staff. And then page 22, you wanted to change Mr. Levin suggested removing member compensation to Mr. Levin suggested removing council member compensation.
That's important.
That's important. That we'll add that. So with those 3 changes, is there a motion to approve the January 7th meeting minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, all in favor?
I just want to add, again, you would consider this an omission, therefore not relevant, but Gene Nocera is included on the list of guests, but he's not properly identified as the Common Council president of Middletown, Connecticut, and I think he should be so identified.
Agreed. We'll make that part of the.
That's just an
So
omission.
is the motion on these changes first, right? We already,
Yes.
somebody already
Yes.
moved it.
We already said
So
we'd move the minutes.
on
The
the
motion is on these changes. So we
Okay.
approve those changes. All in favor?
Yeah, we already said.
So that passes. So we've gotten 3 minutes through, which is a big step.
Now, if what John just said is really important, we can make a motion to add that to it,
We
to
did.
amend what we just approved.
Yeah, I think I think it was
That's what I
included.
just did. Now you need to prove the whole thing.
Yes,
We do-
exactly.
okay.
And you can't.
The change.
Because he interrupted the process. So yes, we have to do that.
Now we got to move the whole thing as amended.
As amended, right?
As amended. All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? No. Okay. I appreciate everybody. My wife is desperate to go to sleep, and I am set up in the office that's in our room, so I'm gonna get on my way. But I greatly appreciate it, and I will check back in with any follow-up information we need, and we'll get this stuff on the agenda for our next one. But thank you all so much.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Take care, guys.
I move to adjourn.